Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. And I should probably say it's not just Notre Dame fans, as we've learned this summer, Ryan. So, welcome, Notre Dame fans, fans of all college football, Ohio State fans, whoever that wants to talk real football. We are here to put our finishing touches, at least for this part of our Irish Breakdown show, on the Notre Dame, Ohio State. Number 5, Notre Dame. Number 2, Ohio State. Epic, epic matchup, Ryan. And today we're going to kind of talk about what's the big picture aspects of this game. And then tomorrow, and then we'll talk about what our predictions are for tomorrow. So Ryan and I had a similar prediction for this game. We had 3 of our staff members picked one team, 2 of our staff members picked another team. So we'll go over all of those predictions today. And then we're also going to have some fun with some predictions of some other big games this weekend, right? I mean, obviously our focus has been on Notre Dame and Ohio State, but there's some other huge games this weekend. Georgia hosts Oregon, play Oregon. I think it's at Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta. So that's a neutral site game that's right down the street from Athens. You've got Utah travels to Florida in a big game, which I think is a bigger game than maybe some people think. I don't think Florida's not ranked right now. I'm a big believer in Billy Napier. This is a team that was in the SEC championship game 2 years ago and the Orange Bowl 3 years ago. They didn't just all of a sudden become a team with no talent. So this is a kind of game where if Utah can win by the end of the year, this win may look a whole lot bigger than it maybe looks right now. And if Florida can win, obviously it's a great start for Billy Napier. We're going to preview all of that, give you our score predictions for that. And then Cincinnati, Arkansas. It's another very fascinating game this weekend. It's going to tell us a lot about 2 teams that are trying to take rises as one, and the other one's trying to stay at the top. So we'll talk about that as well. So let's begin, Ryan, with the main attraction, and not just the main attraction nationally, but of course for our show, and that is Notre Dame, Ohio State. You know, we've broken it down, Ryan. We've talked matchups. We've talked statistical analysis. We've talked all the different aspects of it. I want to have a little bit of a big picture conversation today.
Yep.
And we've tried to stick to the X's and O's and the analysis and all that this week. But the reality is when you look at this game, Ryan, this is a huge game for Notre Dame beyond just the 2022 season. This is a big game for Notre Dame one way or the other, right? And so when I look at it, it's just one of those things, Ryan, where if you win, it's seismic. If you lose, then we get into, well, how much did you lose by? And the answer to that is going to determine just the perception of Notre Dame. So all of the momentum that has been built this offseason by Marcus Freeman either skyrockets with a win, continues to slowly grow with a competitive loss, and gets undercut with a big loss. So all of those things are on the table, and that's just that. And of course, there's college football playoff, opportunities and resume building on the line here. This is just you try not to put too much into game one, but when it's number 5 versus number 2, it's hard not to realize that this is a big moment.
Well, and they're most likely the best team you're going to play in the regular season, and they're also a Midwest power, right? And they have been the Midwest power. So, I mean, to your point, Brian, this isn't just a great football game with the potential for a team maybe to make a championship run, that type of, or both teams to potentially make a championship run. It's also, it impacts recruiting. It impacts just kind of the reputation in the Midwest. It impacts everything. And it impacts the trajectory of this program. Because like you said, Marcus Freeman has done a great job in his staff this offseason to take a lot of the momentum and to continue it throughout the recruiting and excitement building from fans' perspective and media outlets. I mean, there's been a lot of excitement around Notre Dame football. And he has a chance to not only continue that momentum, but to skyrocket it.
Right.
I mean, it's massive. I mean, I don't think you can undersell how important this game is just from a perception standpoint for Notre Dame. Whether they win by 1 or by 100, a win would go so far to saying like, hey man, this plan is real. Like this is different, right? Like this is a step in the absolute positive direction. So this game can go, a couple different ways. Obviously, if Notre Dame does lose or loses handedly, then it's going to kind of be monikered as, and it's the same old type of Notre Dame, right? Like it's the same. You're not going to get out of that stigma. The only way to break out of that little
well, that's the world we live in
yeah,
right now, right, Ryan? I mean, that's the world that Brian Kelly created, and that's what Marcus Freeman was hired to change, right? And I get where you're kind of coming from with just trying to find the right way to say it, but look, there's been this battle. Look, this battle didn't happen when Brian Kelly left. This is a battle that we've been waging at Irish Breakdown for years. Oh, he's gone 54-9, and oh, they've done this, and oh, they've made 2 playoff appearances, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, they weren't competitive on any of those big stages they were on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they built up that great record against bad teams. You know, Brian Kelly went 54-9 the last 5 years because 54-10 is Notre Dame's overall record. I'm not blaming him for the Oklahoma State loss, although somebody was like, well, Brian Kelly never would have blown a 28-7 lead in the Fiesta Bowl. I said, well, Brian Kelly never would have had a 28-7 lead in the Fiesta Bowl, right? First of all. But number two, it's 54-9. They went 10-9 against teams that finished in the top 25. That means they went 44-0 against teams that were not ranked. You don't get your career built on teams that are not ranked. You get your career built on teams that are ranked. And I think they had 1-5 against teams that finished in the top 10. And that's what we're trying to see changed here, right? That's why we were hard on Brian Kelly. But that's the standard that Marcus Freeman is being held to too, Ryan. It's like, look, the expectation is that you need to start not only winning the games you're supposed to win, but maybe win some of these games that you're not supposed to win.
Right.
And you have opportunities to do it. And this year especially, you're going to have several opportunities to do it. And so what this game is, it's a measuring stick for Notre Dame. Where are you? Can you really make all those changes let's just get to the nitty gritty of this, right? Brian Kelly, this, that, and the other thing. And this is the argument I've had for years. Hey, look, here's where we're at. And this is the record. And that's, I don't want to rehash all that kind of stuff, but here's the 2 things I'll point to. In 12 years, Brian Kelly went 19-29 against teams that finished in the top 25. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, he got better in his last 5 years, 10-9 compared to 19. And, so that was 9-20. Okay. Mm-hmm. But you're still borderline 500. 3-16 for his career against top 10 teams. And the thing is 2 of those 3 wins came in the 12 and 13 seasons. So from 14 to 21, there was 1 win over a team that finished the season ranked in the top 10. And there's only 2 against teams that were ranked in the top 10 when they played. So like if you look at the numbers and say, well, what about top 10 teams when they played? Well, it's 4 wins. Because Michigan State in 2013 and Stanford in 2012 were not ranked in the top 10 when they played. Stanford was like 12th or 15th when Notre Dame beat them in 2012. And then Michigan State, who they beat in 2013, who finished 13-1 and ranked 3rd, was unranked. So you take them out, and then you add Stanford 2018, you add Michigan State in 2012, who finished 7-6. And then there was one other game in there. I'm trying to remember what was the other top 10 game that they had that they beat a team that was ranked, but they won 4 games since 2010 against teams that were ranked in Oklahoma in 2012 was ranked in the top 10 at the time, fell out, but still they fell out because they lost to Notre Dame. I mean, if they had a win over Notre Dame and still only lost 2 games, they're a top 10 team. So it's not fair to just completely dismiss it like it doesn't matter. But so it's 4 wins in 12 years over top 10 teams. That's the stigma. We've said this all week, right, Ryan? Like, hey, here's the deal. If you don't I just saw what you were laughing at. If you don't know, I mean, if you don't like the fact that Notre Dame is disrespected, 17.5-point underdog and all these other type of things, but it's earned. You've earned this reputation because you have consistently been defeated and oftentimes defeated convincingly in these games. And yes, there's been the occasional Florida State 2014 and the occasional, win over Clemson and all that they were lacking. And the 2 Georgia games are competitive. I'll give you that. But mixed around that has been a bunch of Miamis and Michigans and from 2019. You've had the postseason games. You've had the Arizona State debacle of 2014. They were a top 10 team.
I tried to keep that game out of my memory, Brian. Thank you
Right.
very much for bringing that up.
But you're down 34-3 at one point. You come all the way back, make it 34-31. You still end up losing 55-30. I mean, you have so many of those games. It's like that's why this exists. So the question, Ryan, and this is the thing that we're going to find out in 2022 is how quickly can that get changed? How quickly can that losing culture get changed?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're going to find out. Can it get changed in one off season? Does it require a couple close losses before you finally kick that door down? Those are the answers we don't know. And that's what makes this game big, because Marcus Freeman and his staff out of the gate get tested for, okay, where are you? Right? It's kind of like Ohio State is what Mike Elko said about the Notre Dame offensive line in 2017. They're human lie detectors.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not where you need to be as a program, if your talent level isn't where it needs to be, if your preparation, your coaching isn't where it needs to be, you're going to find out in this opener. And if it is where it needs to be, then you're going to find that out too. And I think that's what's at stake. Is it's obviously there's all the things at stake, but you're going to learn a lot about yourself, and then say, okay, well, we've got 3 weeks to get ready for North Carolina and get these things fixed. We got 5 weeks to get ready for BYU. We've got 2 months to get ready for Clemson. And so figure out where you come up short, what can you fix now, what needs to be fixed on the recruiting trail, and then roll. And that's what I love about this game is it gives you a chance to really get rolling.
Well, I'm going to give Brian Kelly some credit for 1 second, Brian, right? We talked about the good that he did have is that he got him back to a level where you have to win double-digit games every single year for it to be considered close to a success, right? So that's the fact. That's why this first game can be a barometer, in my opinion, right? Because if Marcus Freeman walked into a cluster, like, I mean, you can't expect this first game to be an answer to if they have arrived or close to closing the gap or they have eliminated the gap or whatever the mantra will be after this game. But the fact that Notre Dame is in a pretty good spot when Marcus Freeman took over, that's the reason that you can kind of do a measuring stick and a barometer. Right. Like it's a
perceived
true test.
To be in a good spot is what I would say.
Yes. Well, yeah. To a degree, I agree with that. Yeah. I would just say though, I mean, they do have, there is a level that is expected at Notre Dame over the last couple of years, obviously, since the 4-8 debacle. Since then, Notre Dame has had regular success, at least from a regular season perspective, for who they play football against, right? So I think that you are measuring yourself against one of the Blue Bloods, one of the teams that has been consistently a good football team, a team that has had multiple championships in the last 20 years. Like this is a good barometer and a measuring stick. And then you add in the regional aspect of everything that Notre Dame, again, is a Midwest team playing against another Midwest power. And that is a great measuring stick. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity for all those things, all those factors to kind of be considered here, because Marcus Freeman did walk into an okay situation. Like it wasn't a bad situation. It wasn't like a dumpster fire.
I'm not saying, it's not like what, I agree. But what I would say is I think, as we've argued in the past, that the situation was not as strong as people made it out to be. Not so much because the talent was lacking, but because the culture was lacking. And I think that's the thing that we have to find out is Notre Dame good enough to just expect them to go out and consistently beat Ohio State and Alabama and teams like that? No, it's not there yet.
Sure.
But is it good enough to where you can go out and in games where I think you do have matchup advantages, like I think they have against Ohio State? I think Notre Dame has more matchup advantages against Ohio State right now than they do against Alabama, for example.
Sure.
But I would then argue that I think actually Ohio State matches up better against Alabama than they do Notre Dame in some areas. I mean, that's just kind of how football works, right? And so that's the thing for me is that the talent gap is not such, and there's one exception, and I'll say that in a second. The talent is not as such that you should be seeing what we have seen in these big games in the past. That's my point. And look, Oregon can go into Columbus and beat them. Michigan can do what they did to them, but yet Notre Dame shouldn't be expected to be within 3 touchdowns, barely within 3 touchdowns. That's my thing. And I get why the odds are what they are, because that's about the only way they can get people to bet on. I mean, if the spread was 7 points, no one's betting on Notre Dame except the diehard Notre Dame fans. Nobody. No. And that's why the spread is what it is. It's not disrespect. It's about trying to get people to bet on both sides. And because of Notre Dame's track record in these games, that is why it is what it is. So that's the culture, that's the environment, that's the perception that Marcus Freeman has to change. And we're going to find out how quickly he can or cannot change it and just where they are. Because I will say the only time that I felt in the last really 10 years, really since the Orange Bowl basically in 2012, there's only been 2 games that I can think of where I just felt like Notre Dame was clearly the far inferior team talent-wise. 2014 USC, partly because Notre Dame had so many injured players in that game. I mean, you didn't have Sheldon Day, you didn't have Jerron Jones, you didn't have Drew Tranquil. I mean, you had so many of your best players were out that game because they were so beat up by that point in time in the year. And then the other one was Alabama 2020. Now, I thought Notre Dame should have been more competitive, but Bama clearly had the better team that day, and they had the better team going in. It's kind of funny, Ryan. I was looking up my game predictions for that game, and so I kind of had some fun with it, looking at the Rose Bowl in 2020, and so what I did was I made 2 game predictions for that game, and I thought about doing it for this one too, but I decided not to. But my game prediction for that game, I did 2. I did a heart prediction and a head prediction. And my heart prediction was 37-34 Notre Dame. But my analysis prediction, my real prediction was 47-20. So Notre Dame actually finished a little closer, but it's because, as I said, Alabama called the dogs off. My point is, it was clear going into that game that Alabama was significantly better than Notre Dame that season. Notre Dame also had some injuries. You didn't have Braden Lindsey. You didn't have Kevin Austin. You had a lot of other issues going on. And so, but all these other games, Clemson, the ACC title game, that was not a game where Notre Dame was the inferior team. I'm sorry, it wasn't. They had the inferior quarterback, but Notre Dame also moved the ball up and down the field early on Clemson. I don't feel that they had the inferior teams to Georgia either year. Now, could you argue Georgia was a little bit better? Yes, but they weren't inferior, meaning they didn't belong on that field.
Right.
And so to me, I feel the same way about this game. Now, the thing we have to learn is, has the coaching and the health of the program mentally, emotionally, spiritually, culturally, technically, physically changed enough to where you can now go out and say, hey, we're going to play to our potential and go out there and win this thing. That is what we're going to find out about this football team tomorrow night.
I'm very interested too, Brian, just from like the jump, from like the first kickoff, quick return, whatever it is, from the first snap, to see how this team carries itself. Like, that's what I'm really interested with. Because, like, yeah, we saw Coach Freeman as the head coach against Oklahoma State, but like, I don't think that's a real barometer for what this team is going to look like from a emotional game day perspective, right? Like, I don't believe that.
Can I just say something real quick?
Of course, yes.
I hope that we see this team come out in the first half like that team came out.
Well, yes,
right?
Yes.
You're correct. I just always kind of chuckle. Like, you're absolutely right, but I'm just like, but can we take a little bit from that game? Here? Can we take the first half, from that game?
Hey, man,
and bring it.
If they're up, what was it, 28-14 at halftime?
I'll tell you this: if they're up 28-7 right before halftime, I don't think they're going to have the same mistakes that they made in that game. Correct.
Right. I mean, that was the one good thing about that game, is although it was a meltdown and it wasn't what you wanted, obviously, in the first game, but it could be a learning measurement, right? Like, it could be a learning experience for the staff and the players associated that were part of that game to know, like, this is what we can't do, right? Like, when we're up, we need to learn from our mistakes in that situation. Right. So I think it can be a positive if it's used correctly. But I mean, more than anything, man, like, is this team going to be super loose before this game, right? Like, are they going to be fired up, running around, acting like they've been there before? Are they going to be a little tight? Like, I'm going to assume it's the former, just because that's just kind of the vibe that we get just from practices and the Oklahoma State game and how Coach Freeman carries himself overall. But I am just looking so forward to just seeing the pregame atmosphere. Like, that's really what because I think that's going to matter, like, because we've talked about it a bunch. There have been, in those big games in recent years, seems like the teams are always a little tight going into those, right? Like, they're a little bit like animated and not like really letting it hang out, letting it loose type of thing. So I'm excited to see what the atmosphere is for Notre Dame heading into that first kickoff, because I have to think that they're going to be pumped up and electric, man, because like they need it. I mean, because that could be the separator, Brian. I mean, it could be the separator. I mean, they've obviously been honing the finer points of coaching and playing and being a part of a scheme and doing all that type of stuff. But at the end of the day, man, if we think that there is some back and forth as far as Ohio State stronger at this position, Notre Dame stronger at this position, there is some jockeying of talent. So a main separator could be like, who is the team that is the most loose and ready to just kind of get it going, man? And like, I'm just really excited to see the energy around this program on Saturday. Tomorrow is Saturday. I can't believe it.
It's wild. It took a while to get here, but it is now here. You know what, Ryan? I'm just looking forward. Here's where this all boils down to. And somebody in the chat said it, and I was waiting to say it, and they said it. So I love when great minds think alike. And here's it's the history expert said, we can learn while winning. And to me, that's exactly where we're coming from. Like, and that's what I love about the program that Alabama has built, where Nick Saban gets more pissed off in interviews after wins than he tends to after losses. Now, they don't have a lot of losses, and some of the times after losses, he gets pretty fired up. But, you know, for me, Ryan, I look at it and I say, when does Notre Dame get to the point where there's no more moral victories? You actually have victories that you can then say, hey, you know what? Like we had a great win today, but we know we got to get better. You know, if we want to keep winning, if we want to beat North Carolina and BYU and Clemson and USC week after week after week after week, we got to get better here. We got to get better there. You know, we got this one done, but, you know, we got to go make those changes. And then, of course, both of these staffs completely look overhauled from where they were a year ago. Obviously, Ohio State has the one constant at the very top, but these are also two very new look coaching staffs, Ryan. And so now it's about, okay, which of the changes ends up having the biggest impact? You know, can the new coaching staff hires with Tommy Rees now having Harry Heastan and D'Lo McCullough and Chancey Stuckey and Jared Parker, you know, have a similar or better impact than Jim Knowles and Tim Walton? And I'm, for the life of me, cannot remember their other DB coach's name. I apologize. And mean no disrespect. It's just slipping my mind right now of who their other new hire was. But, you know, they've overhauled that staff. They've got a new O-line coach in. Notre Dame has a new D coordinator. Those are going to be an interesting aspect to this as well, Ryan, because I want to see kind of, you know, so that's, you know, that's kind of where I see it, is something I'm really excited about, to see how this develops. Yeah. Right. And to see which of the moves ends up working out the best in this particular game. That's going to make this really, really, really fun.
And it's weird to evaluate sometimes, in my opinion, because sometimes hires are more long-term based than they are short-term based, right? Like, just because, so if like, let's say whatever side wins tomorrow night, it could be the simple fact that a coach was hired and put into a position where they were in a better position to succeed early, right? Like, that doesn't necessarily mean that they were the best hire long-term. So again, it's a long-term versus short-term thing. But regardless, man, this is a great opportunity for Notre Dame. It's a great opportunity for Ohio State. It is a big game. And I kind of love that this is the first game of the season, Brian. If I'm being completely honest, man, like I want to know what this team is to a large degree. You know, like, I want to know where they are, because there's a lot that you can take out of a win. There's a lot you can take out of a loss. I think that there's just going to be some general understanding, because I'll be completely honest about this, and I've talked about this. There's a lot of projection to this team. I think they can be really good, but it's also they're slightly they're a slight enigma to a degree, right? Because it's like there's a little bit of volatility to how good they can be, or how just good they could be. I mean, there is a little bit of a chasm, in my opinion. Could this team maybe be a team that is set up better to, hey, we have a nice 2022 season, but 2023 is the year? Like, there's a lot of question marks as far as when is the peak and how good this team can be early on versus the end of the season. And, you know, some positions have wild cards to a degree, you know, a couple wide receivers and secondary, and there's a lot of things to figure out. But I think that the great thing is that we're going to have an answer to quite a few questions after the end, after the final whistle tomorrow night. So it's going to be very interesting to see.
I think the thing that I guess kind of has frustrated me all offseason, Ryan, is kind of what you said about Notre Dame is not inaccurate. We don't really know what this team is going to be. My frustration is why is everyone acting like we do know what Ohio State is going to be? Like, why is there the assumption that their defense is all of a sudden going to stop being terrible, which, let's be honest, it was a lot last year. and Notre Dame's offense or defense isn't going to make jumps with their new coaches? Why is there an assumption that Justin Fry is going to fix the Ohio State offensive line, but Al Golden and other things aren't going to, make Notre Dame's secondary better? Right. And those, I guess, are my frustrations. Is it just seems like there's an inconsistency there. But again, that just kind of goes through and points to the whole thing of what we're talking about. The assumption is because Ohio State has won these games and Notre Dame has not. Mm-hmm. And that's ultimately where it comes from. And we talked about this. I wrote an article about this earlier this week, Ryan. Notre Dame is a 17.5-point underdog. And I say this figuratively, not literally. I understand why they are literally a 17.5 underdog. It's about betting. It's about trying to create as many people betting on both sides. Because if you're Vegas and everybody's betting Ohio State and Notre Dame wins, you are golden. But if Ohio State wins, then you're kind of, it's not as good of a weekend for you. And so you do want to try to create the betting on both sides. What I mean more is like figuratively from a perception standpoint of why everyone is still betting on Ohio State, despite the fact it was a 14.5-point spread, because you earned that as Notre Dame because of what you did or didn't do, I should say. If you want to change it, change it. And we've been here before, right? And Georgia is very similar. 2019, Notre Dame was a 16-point underdog going into Athens in 2019. And they had a moral victory, lost by 6 and got the ball at midfield with 2 minutes left, basically, and couldn't get it done, but you battled and you earned Georgia's respect. I'm sick of earning people's respect by not getting blown out, right? Like, this is freaking Notre Dame. Like, Notre Dame should not be getting moral victories because they didn't get blown out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Notre Dame shouldn't have a head coach saying, hey, we only lost by 27 to Clemson, but Alabama lost by 28. Hey, we only lost by 17 to Alabama, but Ohio State lost by, 28? Was it 28? Something like that. This is freaking Notre Dame, dude. You don't brag about almost winning or not losing by as much as people thought. When Marcus Freeman has arrived, the moment he's arrived is when people look at these games and say, of course Notre Dame's going to win this game because that's what they've done. Of course Notre Dame's going to be a 6-point favorite over Clemson. Did you see what they did to Ohio State? Right? Mm-hmm. That's when you know your program has arrived. And honestly, if you really want to get down to the nitty-gritty of why I got sick of Brian Kelly the last few years, it's that right there. I got sick of a coach who basically took pride in not losing by as much as other teams lost to the team that won a championship. I got sick of Brian Kelly trying to say, hey, look, nobody gave us a shot against Georgia, and we only lost by 6. You know what I mean? I want to see a coach, and I want to see a program that goes out there and says, you don't want to respect us? I guarantee you over the next 3 hours, you will learn to respect us. And if you don't, it's going to be you're going to have a lot of explaining to do at your press conference after this game, because we're going to take it to you. That's where this program needs to get to. And I don't know if they're there yet. We're going to find out tomorrow. But that's when we'll know that Marcus Freeman has arrived, when we start talking about we're not having this 17.5-point underdog conversation anymore. It's like, no, you Notre Dame's got a shot to win this sucker because they've got the talent, they've got the coaching, and they're back to being what a Notre Dame team is supposed to be. I cannot promise you that Notre Dame will be the fastest team on the field Saturday night. I can't promise you that. Does Notre Dame have better speed than people think? Yes. Can I guarantee that they're faster than Ohio State top to bottom? No, I can't guarantee that. In spots they are, in spots they aren't. But here's what I should be able to guarantee. Should be able to. And we don't know. There's no question about this one thing. They will be the most physical team on the field on Saturday night. We used to at least be able to promise you that.
Yep.
Win, lose, or draw, you used to at least be able to promise that. That's been gone. That's gone too. Those are things that I want to come back to, is where, hey, you know what? You may end up beating Notre Dame. This is the era I grew up in, right? And makes me sad you couldn't experience this firsthand. You may beat Notre Dame, but you're limping away from that fight.
You're going to have a black eye.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? And that's where I want to get to. But then also, even beyond that, where, no, I'm sorry, you're not winning against Notre Dame. I grew up in an era when Miami won 3 titles in 5 years, and the 2 years they didn't win a title were years Notre Dame beat them. That's where I want to get back to, where they're beating that team. They bring in the Florida State, who was the premier team in the early 90s outside of Miami. Bama had a couple good years too, and you beat them. And not only do you beat them from start to finish. Mm-hmm. You outplay them from start to finish. You go to the Sugar Bowl and you play Florida and everybody's dismissing you and you curb stomp them in the fourth quarter because you are the more physical team. You play number one Colorado in the Orange Bowl after you lost to Miami at the end of the season, and you beat them, convincingly beat them because you're the more physical football team, you're the better coach football team. That's where Notre Dame needs to get back to. Brian Kelly had no desire to get him back there. He thought Notre Dame kept him from getting there. I think Notre Dame, or Brian Kelly, kept Notre Dame from getting there. Marcus Freeman's job is to show which one was right. And step one to that is Saturday night. So that's my thoughts on the game. Right? I don't know if you have a response to that before we go to predictions.
All I want to say is that I want to know what it's like for my fandom for one of these games to be a victory, Brian. That's a starting point, right? That's a starting point. Can you imagine being the team? And I know you can imagine it because it was at one point that this was a fact for Notre Dame in your lifetime, where Notre Dame goes to a game against a top 10 team, a 10-win team, and oh man, you kept it within 27. Wow, must be nice. That's the best game we played all season. Right. Yeah, okay. I want competition. And we've heard that so often from Marcus Freeman all off season. I don't want there to be a second during the game tomorrow where you have to question if Notre Dame was good enough to compete with that team, right? Good enough to win is a completely different conversation, but I don't want this to be a situation where the talent deficit is just so stark that you're just like, Notre Dame doesn't deserve to be on the field. I want to see I want to see proof that Notre Dame is closer than maybe a lot of people think they are. And that starts tomorrow. It's a big indicator.
That they're there.
Or that they're there.
Right.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Well, hey, in order to get there, though, you need to prove some first steps, right? That it might be the time. So got to see it, man. Got to see it. It's a show me business at the end of the day. And I hope that Notre Dame is able to show it tomorrow night.
So, Ryan, we got some super chats coming in. We will get to those here in a little bit, but it is prediction time. And this is what makes this fun. Now, our predictions are, you have to understand, Ryan and I both kind of come from a playing and coaching background. And I've tried to explain this to people before, but our channel has grown a lot since last year. We're over twice as big as we were last year. So I want people to understand where I'm coming from. We don't make picks based off our fandom. We don't make picks based off our emotions. We don't make picks based on, we don't want to go against the grain of what everybody's saying. So let's go along with the flow. We look at this as from a coaching standpoint. And obviously we covered Notre Dame. And so we are looking at it from a Notre Dame standpoint. And I've tried, but I cannot disassociate myself from the ability to look at this as a coach and say, if I'm coaching, if this happens, we're going to win this game. That's just how I look at it. So prepare yourself from that regard. And that's how I've always looked at games. There's never been a game, even when we went and played Mount Union, there's never been a game that I went into that game saying, okay, we're going to win this game. Right. I mean, you always feel like you've prepared yourself and you look at if this happens. And so that's kind of where we're coming from. But, I kind of went into this prediction, Ryan, and I said to myself, look, I'm just going to go with my heart on this one. That's kind of what I said was like all summer. I'm going to go with my heart on this one and have some fun with it. But honestly, the more I break the game down statistically, schematically, personnel wise, what was lost, what's coming back, who's stepping into certain spots, who I think is going to make a jump on both teams. It really to me comes down to looking at past trends. It really comes down to my pick, I believe, is one that I can base off of matchups and scheme and players and those type of things. And my prediction for this game is Notre Dame 34, Ohio State 26. Basically how I see it going down is both teams score 6 times. The difference in the game is Notre Dame has 4 touchdowns and 2 field goals. Ohio State has 2 touchdowns and 4 field goals. That's how I see it. I think Ohio State has been a team over the years that has not really come out of the gate great at home for whatever reason. I think part of it is they are such a pass-heavy offense that can kind of take some time to get going compared to a team that just comes out and runs it and can run it down your throat. In the years that Ohio State did come out well early, they were years where they were a really strong running team. Now, maybe this team is that, but, we'll have to find that out. But I have it, to me, Ryan, I think the Notre Dame defense is going to be able to make enough stops in the red zone to force field goals in those condensed field situations. And I think the opposite is true on the other side. I think Notre Dame's going to punch it in, and I think Notre Dame's going to start off really fast and then have to hold on. I do think that's how the game is going to play out. And when I look at it, I kind of see it, Ohio State scores to make it 31-26. Notre Dame kind of goes on a long time-consuming drive at the end of the game, kicks a field goal to go up 8, and then Ohio State doesn't have enough time to kind of get another one in there. So that's how I see the game playing out for me, Ryan. So before we kind of predict game balls, that's how I see this one playing out. What is your prediction, and how do you see the game playing out?
Brian, we see this game pretty similarly, I think. I mean, I was just looking at my score prediction that was in the piece that you posted today about the game prediction. And my last 2 sentences are word for word. Notre Dame got off to a fast start before Ohio State mounted a comeback in the fourth quarter. The Irish are able to hold them off at the end and escape the opener with a tremendous victory. So I also agree. I think Notre Dame has the chance, and they have to, and we talked about this yesterday, get off to a fast start. I think they have to. And I think they do that by coming out and being so much more physical than they were last year. If there's one thing about Notre Dame that I believe this year, it's that they are going to be a much more physically impressive football team, just from a play style perspective. I expect the offensive line, the significance of the run game and implementation of the run game. I think that Notre Dame is going to come out and they're going to punch them in the face a little bit, and I know Ohio State eventually is going to punch back, which is why I kind of said, like, they're going to mount a little bit of a comeback here. They're going to get back to this football game because, again, Ohio State's a really good team, right?
Oh, yeah.
We've been talking about this all week. This is not going to be a one-sided affair, in my opinion. I'd be
shocked.
If
either way,
team,
either way,
100%. Right. No matter who wins this football game, I would be very surprised if it was just like a rollover. I would be very, very surprised in that fact. So I had Notre Dame 34, Ohio State 31. I talked on the show yesterday, the day before that. I think 31 is kind of the number for Ohio State. If you have 31 or less, I feel good about Notre Dame's chances. If it starts getting into the mid-high 30s or into the 40s, I think that Notre Dame doesn't have much of a chance in that type of affair. So I think Notre Dame comes out strong, they come out fast, and they're able to hold off the Buckeyes for a 3-point victory at the end.
That's how I see it. Now, here's the other prediction I have, Ryan, and I'm not sure. I think you said the same thing. But here's one thing that I'm more confident in my next prediction than I am in the score of this game. I'm not going to lie. I'm not super confident in the prediction of this game. I'm not. Why? Because Ohio State's really good. You're going on the road against the number 2 team in the country. I personally would not have Ohio State number 2. I would have them number 3. It ain't a big difference. You know my stance, Ryan. Georgia's number 1 until somebody beats them. They just are. I think Alabama has more coming back on both sides of the ball, and they were better than Ohio State last year, so they're coming from a better starting point. And I actually think Nick Saban's made some really good moves this offseason with some guys that left. I think the O-line hire is going to be huge for them this year. I'm just a believer that you're the champ until somebody beats you. I said the same thing about LSU in 2020. I say the same thing about Georgia now. Now, LSU obviously proved to not be the champ pretty quickly early that season, but that's just how I feel, right? So this is a really darn good football team. Really darn good football team in Ohio State. It's just when I look at it, I think Notre Dame matches up really well with them. And if you're an Ohio State fan and you're being objective, you can look at our prediction and say, I think you guys are wrong and Ohio State's going to win this game. Totally fine. But if you don't understand why we came to this, then I don't think that you really have a legitimate understanding of who your football team is and some of the own questions that you have to figure out. Now, part of our prediction is projecting that Notre Dame will improve in areas, because if we're banking on Notre Dame running the football, well, if you watched Notre Dame last year, they weren't really good at running the football. So there's projection on both sides. Fair. It's just when I look at the areas that Notre Dame has to get better in, I'm more confident that they're going to be able to make a quicker adjustment than some of the areas that Ohio State has to make improvements in, which leads me to my big prediction.
Okay.
The loser of this game does not lose another regular season game. The loser of this game will run the table, and it does not matter who it is, because I actually think Ohio State fans are not going to like this. I actually think getting smacked in the mouth a little bit in the opener is going to be really good for Ohio State. And if I'm being honest, if my prediction is correct that both of these teams are going to run the table, I kind of almost want Notre Dame to not win this game. Bear with me here, because if Notre Dame runs the table and Ohio State beats Notre Dame, I don't see Ohio State losing but one game all year. If that, they could easily go 13-0. because I think Notre Dame's the only team that, and especially after watching Penn State last night, Penn State's not beating Ohio State. So I my stance on rematches, Ryan. I think it's hard to win a rematch. And so if I have this belief that Notre Dame, Ohio State are really going to roll the rest of the way, I kind of want to be the team that's got something to prove in the rematch. But, that actually made me think a little bit about picking Ohio State in this game. But I just really feel like the trench play, I think, is going to favor Notre Dame. I think that the other aspect of it, too, is I think Notre Dame knows a lot more about Ohio State than Ohio State knows about Notre Dame. No matter what you think, what Ohio State's offense is going to look like, and you just studied 12 games in preparation for a bowl game of what Jim Knowles is going to do. Now, is there a change in how that's going to look under the current personnel? Yes, but this is the second time this Notre Dame coaching staff has had to prepare for and Tommy Rees especially, has had to prepare for a Jim Knowles team. Actually, first time Tommy Rees has done it, but Notre Dame also had to prepare for Duke in the past. So when he was the D coordinator at Duke. So they're going to know a lot about Jim Knowles. I don't know what the heck Al Golden is going to do defensively.
Right.
Nobody does, right? And so to me, I don't know what Tommy Rees's offense is necessarily going to look like with this current coaching staff, because he has run two distinctly different offenses the last 2 years out of necessity. They didn't have weapons in the pass game in 2020, mainly at quarterback. Last year they had a quarterback, but they didn't have the offensive line. So we're projecting a lot of things, and that's another thing that factored into this decision for me, Ryan.
It's what gives me the most hope, I think, Brian, or the most the reasoning for why I kind of feel the way I do. It's because, like you just mentioned, right? There's new coaches on both sides of the coin here. One person, though, that we know very well is Harry Hiestand. He's one guy that we have literally. It's not that he's done this at other places. He's coming in here to put his touch on the program. He's literally done this at Notre Dame before, right? Like, he's literally come in and improved trench play almost immediately. While on the other side, again, Jim Knowles. I love Jim Knowles, man. I think he's a really good defensive coordinator. But the fact of the matter is that his track record tells you there's an adjustment period there, right? Harry Hiestand doesn't say that. Harry Hiestand says the minute that he takes over a team, the offensive line is going to be better. And if they're better than they were last year, then I think, I know they're going to be better than they were last year. If they're significantly better than they were last year, then I think they have a chance to win the trenches on both sides of the football. I do. And I know people, PFF graded Ohio State as the number one offensive line in college football. Sure, guys. I'll say this, though. I've watched quite a bit of Ohio State's offensive line last year. Yeah. I'm not buying it. I'm just not buying it right now. Right. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're way better. Justin Fry, I like as an offensive line coach for sure, but we'll see. We'll see about how that kind of winds up. But
I'm gonna say this, Ryan.
Yeah,
this is part of the issue for me in evaluating this game. Is there's a different conversation for me for what Ohio State is going to be and what Ohio State is going to be on September 3rd. And this is my whole thing is with Harry, there's kids that on this roster that Harry has coached. There's coaches that have coached with Harry before, and there's several guys in the lineup that Harry recruited as well. I mean, he recruited Andrew Kristofic, he recruited Zeke Correll, he recruited Josh Lugg. There's a little bit of a difference there, and so, for me, when I look at this too, is I think Ohio State, offensive line wise, should not be the number one offensive line in the country right now on PFF. I would argue that Notre Dame also shouldn't be number two, because both of them have a lot to prove. Look, Michigan's got 3 guys coming back, and they got in this center from transfer. They're the defending Joe Moore Award winner. I can't justify having Notre Dame and Ohio State ahead of them. I can't right now. It's just that I think Notre Dame is going to get to that point faster than Ohio State will. But I do think by the end of the year, we are going to see that, because I do like Ohio. I think I like their talent a little bit more than you do. I like Donovan Jackson quite a bit coming out of high school. I think he's a guard, not a tackle. So I like that move. I never thought he was a tackle coming out of high school. I think he's a better guard. I think Luke Whippler is exactly what you'd expect from an undersized kid from New Jersey to be. I think Matthew Jones is a tough, try-hard kid. He's not as athletic as some of the guys they've had. He's not as maybe physically gifted as some of the other players they've had. Mm-hmm. Man, you made a good point in your breakdown of him. That kid plays hard. So I think he's going to bring some toughness that I think at times last year they just did not have. and having them consistently in the lineup instead of coming in and out like he did last year. I don't think that that's where they're going to be. So I do think by the end of the year, Ohio State's going to be a top 5 offensive line. I don't think they're going to be better than Notre Dame's, but I do think they're going to be a top 5 offensive line. I'm just not necessarily buying it in game 1.
Right.
And also partly because I do think, again, there's a reason why the pass game takes longer to develop than the run game, because it requires so many more moving parts, literally. That includes pass protection, right? And so I think that's another area that I think where when you look at this, Notre Dame is going to have an opportunity to kind of enforce their will on them. And Ohio State fans get real upset about this, but look at the games you lost last year. Look at the games that were competitive last year. They were games the other team came in and punched you in the mouth. And so they've got to prove that they can play well in those type of games as well. And let's be honest, Ohio State has not done that a whole lot the last few years. Even Clemson, that was the knock we had on Clemson in 2020. This is not the Clemson teams of the past. This is Trevor Lawrence and a bunch of which is why you and I both predicted Clemson's descent last year, because we knew that Trevor Lawrence covered a lot of warts that existed on that team. This wasn't the 2018 Clemson team, which is why Notre Dame beat them. Because if it would have been the 2018 Clemson team, Notre Dame doesn't beat them in 2020. And so I just think that they've got some things they got to work out, just like Notre Dame's got some things they got to work out. And I'm not ready to give them the benefit of the doubt that everybody else seems to be willing to give them, because they have, to me, as many warts as Notre Dame does. I just think Notre Dame matches up better against Ohio State than they might against some other teams. For example, I think they match up better against Ohio State than they do Georgia right now, because of Notre Dame's unprovenness on the perimeter. I just think that a team that's really good in the trenches, like I'd expect Georgia to be, would be a better matchup for them. I just think Notre Dame's going to have a chance to go out there and dominate in the trenches, and they're going to, I think, surprise some people with the speed that they have on offense. I think that's going to be the biggest surprise for me on this football team.
I'm so upset that I'm intellectually dishonest. Sorry.
I'm sorry. That person's gone.
Yeah. I'm sorry. That took me back for a second, because again, it's just I can't project Notre Dame to get better and also have some concern.
Dude, let's not even waste our time on that. I'm booting all the Ohio State fans. I'm not going to let them drag our show down. All right.
I know. So it's frustrating. It's a little frustrating.
All good.
But
it's all good.
Look, and you kind of reiterated a lot of and kind of expanded on it, Brian. My biggest thing is that I think, especially the Harry Hiestand hire, I think that there is a easier projection for early success with a couple of Notre Dame hires comparative to the Ohio State hires. Again, I would not want to play Ohio State at the end of the season, because if they get the offensive line figured out, if they get the defense starting to trend in the right direction, then they are. I mean, any team in the country is going to have a tough time beating them. Like, not just Notre Dame, like Alabama and the best of the best are going to have a tough time beating an Ohio State team if the offensive line is improved and their defense is up to snuff, right? Like, and there is talent. There is. Ohio State could get better. I just personally think that it's a little more likely that a Harry Hiestand coached offensive line is better in game 1 than a Justin Fry coached offensive line.
But here's the thing that frustrates me with some of these comments is there's a lack of objectivity here, I believe. And the lack of objectivity is you're assuming that Ohio State's going to make improvements that Notre Dame is not, but what you're not acknowledging is that the baseline for Notre Dame is higher on defense than it is for Ohio State. The baseline on the offensive line, in my opinion, is higher than it is for Ohio State. And then it comes down to what I said before, the knowns versus the unknowns. Mm-hmm. That's the point. And so there's this, like, one of the Notre Dame fans who said this, like, Notre Dame's got to prove to me they can win these games. Fair, very 100%, fair. 100%. We talked about that for like 30 minutes at the beginning. But here's the difference. The conversation was, I think this Notre Dame team is good, but they just have too many unknowns. And I'm thinking, with all due respect, there's more unknowns on Ohio State's roster right now than there are on Notre Dame's. Mm-hmm. Again, there's an assumption, well, we don't know what Notre Dame is going to be a wide receiver. Yeah, we kind of do, more so, I think, than Ohio State, because Notre Dame does have a star pass catcher, just like Ohio State has a star pass catcher. His name is Michael Mayer. Lorenzo Styles caught more passes last year than Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka combined. Right? I mean, that's the fact. That's a fact. Now,
and yet
they were playing behind. We know why it happened.
Sure.
The point is it happened. And so, you look at the secondary. Denzel Burke is a good player. He was not better than Cam Hart last year. He was not. Cam Brown was not better than Cam Hart last year. We know who Brandon Joseph is. Ryan thinks that Josh Proctor is going to be a good player. He hasn't shown it yet. He was okay in 2020 and he was hurt last year. So you think the linebackers are going to get better. We don't know. As bad as Notre Dame's linebackers were last year, they were still better than Ohio State's. I mean, that's the reality of it. So that's where you kind of come down to it and say, this is why we predict what we predict. It may not happen. It may, but this is where we're coming from. And if you can't at least say, I think you're wrong, but I understand where you're coming from, then I don't think we're having an honest conversation. So that's basically where my issue comes from.
Yeah. Yep. And again, it's just another, you talked about Emeka Egbuka and Marvin Harrison Jr.
Incredibly talented players.
Incredibly talented. I'm sure that they're both going to be really good football players, but why are we assuming that they're the next coming and Lorenzo Styles can't be the next guy, right? Like why I just don't understand why that assumption is made. And I understand, well, I do understand why, because Ohio State has done better at
that's the proven
talent.
track record part. Yep,
I get
exactly. Because look at Jackson
that.
last year. Jackson had like 10 catches for like 40, like 80 yards as a freshman in 2020. Yeah. And then boom, breaks out and does what he does. So, and our thing, Ryan, and I think we're on the same page here. It's not that we're saying that Marvin Harrison and Emeka aren't going to be really good this year. They are. It's the opposite of you are assuming that Lorenzo Styles is not. And that's the difference. It's like the people say, well, your quarterback's never played before. Did you watch your quarterback last year at Ohio State? Tyler Buckner, how many yards did he have passing last year? 286? Is that what it was? I'm trying to find it here real quick. I think it was 286. Let me just find it here. I got it right here. Find it really quickly. Tyler Buckner had, let's see, last year passing the football. He had in 2021, Tyler had 298 passing yards last year. That's 298 more passing yards than CJ Stroud had in his coming into his first year as a starter, right? So again, it's if you're gonna use something against Notre Dame, at least do it consistently with your own team and don't act like, hey, if you're gonna say, well, Tyler Buckner hasn't proven it, but our unproven players are going to come out and be great. You're not having an honest conversation, and this is what our channel's about. You can disagree. We may be wrong. We're not perfect or infallible, but at least make a coherent, consistent argument. Don't say that Notre Dame can't win because they have unproven players and Ohio State is going to win because of their unproven players. And that's pretty much what we've seen. I think this is going to be a great game. I think that Ohio State by the end of the year, I think Ohio State by the end of September is going to be a tremendous team, to be completely honest with you. I just know what they're installing. Basically, here's what it comes down to. The change that they're making now is the one Notre Dame made a year ago. And if you remember, Notre Dame went to a really complex, diverse, multiple defense last year, going from Clark Lee, whose defense was pretty much just like, here's where you line up and here's what you do. And it was a pretty, I don't want to say it was simplistic because it wasn't. There were some complexities to it. But, alignment assignment-wise, Ryan, Clark Lee's defense wasn't super, super complex. And then you went to you're a 3-3-1, 3-3-5 on one snap. You're a 4-2 on another snap. You're moving here, you're moving there. And guess what happened? You gave up a lot of big plays early in the season to not very good football teams. Then by the end of the year, that Notre Dame defense was playing really well until the bowl game when the defensive coordinator was no longer the defensive coordinator, right? That's what I think Ohio State's going to go through, in my opinion. And it's going to take some time. Once they get there, they're going to be fine. But in the opener, I believe it's going to create some problems because we've seen this before. We saw it with Notre Dame last year. We've seen it in past years. It takes some time for teams to really get rolling when you're putting in the kind of complex system that Jim Knowles is putting in. I think he needs to put it in. It's what Ohio State needs to do to be successful. It's just going to take a little bit of time to get there. I mean, let's not forget, as good as Jeff Hafley was, in his 1 year there, it takes time. It takes time to get those things going. You're not playing Florida Atlantic in the opener. You're not playing Cincinnati and Indiana and Miami to start your season. You're playing Notre Dame first. right? And so I remember watching that Florida Atlantic game thinking, boy, if that quarterback for Florida Atlantic could complete a freaking pass, they've had a couple guys open. If you remember that, I don't know if you remember that game. They scored 21 points, but if I remember correctly, they weren't like really offensive points because they only had like 200 some yards of offense. But I just remember thinking like, boy, there's chances to be there because you're making that kind of change. Notre Dame is not making the big schematic changes that Ohio State is making. And those take time. And that's kind of the point that we're coming from.
And it's a great point because, I mean, also the simple fact of you have Marcus Freeman that's still on the staff, right? I mean, like, that's the biggest thing for me. It's like, I know some people push back and say you're also changing a defensive coordinator to kind of your talking point there, right? But it's also, yes, but the person that implemented the defense last year is still on the staff. So there's still going to be kind of conversation and ability to collaborate on that regard. Jim Knowles is starting from scratch. I mean, he's putting in his system. He's getting players used to it. I mean, and I think there's going to be a transitional period there. I think it's more likely that there is a bigger transitional period from Ohio State early on in the season defensively than there will be with Notre Dame. That's just all I believe. It's just why I believe it. So same thing with Justin Fry versus Harry Houston. It's the same exact thing.
That's going to end up being the best hire that Ryan Day made, in my opinion. When it's all said and done, I think Justin Fry – everybody's talking about Jim Knowles now. I think when it's all said and done, it's going to be Justin Fry is going to be the hire that people are going to be talking about at the end of the year. I do. And Ryan, you know, we've known about Justin Fry for a long time.
Yeah.
Because we learned about him when Harry Hiestand left the first time. As we said this week, Justin Fry was one of the finalists for that job. And he was one of a couple guys that the Notre Dame players liked more than the guy that they hired. He ended up going to UCLA, and we saw the job he did there. So I know Jim Knowles gets – yeah, and I think Jim Knowles is a good defensive coordinator. I think you are a little higher on him than I am, I think a little bit, but we both think he's a good defensive coordinator. Sure. I think Justin Fry is a really good offensive line coach. I just think it's going to take him a little bit just some time to get that thing going. But I think by the end of the year, by November – I'll say this, by the time they play Michigan – the hire that everyone is going to be talking about is going to be Justin Fry. That's my prediction for this team. I think that was because the thing I like about Justin Fry is his thing is he's a guy that believes in physicality. He's an old school, even though he's young, he's an old school line coach because he learned under Steve Adazio. I mean, I was told when he interviewed Notre Dame, they're still using boards. Like his drills were still using boards. Like I didn't know anybody still use boards, right? Like that's how old school he was, even though he's a young guy. But it's a lot like Harry's philosophy of pad level, drive your feet, use your hands, finish, be physical. And Ohio State's offensive line, honestly, has been missing that for years. Even when they had J.K. Dobbins and, you know, like some of the really good backs in recent years, Travion Henderson last year, their run game was more about scheme and talent than it was about just dominating people. Now, was it the 19 line or the 20 line that ran really well because they had big guys that could just move people, but they were moving people that just weren't that good. Was it 2019? Is that the year? Was that the year JK had 2,000? Yeah, it was 2019. It was JK's last year. JK Dobbins last year. Like they had Josh Myers, they had Wyatt Davis. You and I were talking about this yesterday.
Yeah, it was a physical line.
Right. And so they had big guys. I don't think they were necessarily physical from a style of play standpoint. They were physical just because they were big.
They were huge.
You know, and even then it's like if you could put the kind of emphasis on just toughness that I think they needed, that's why I say you're because what's the one thing I've been saying all summer and people say, man, I wish Notre Dame had a few games to warm up before playing Ohio State. What was my automatic answer every time? No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't want this team having 3 games as a warm up to get everything going. You just don't. And there's the aspect of you don't want them having 3 games of knowledge of what you do. Because as I said, I do think we're going to see more changes when it comes to more uncertainty. Jack Cohn offense is not, and an Ian Book offense is not going to look the same as a Tyler Buckner offense. It's just not.
For sure.
So that's basically where I come down on it.
And I will echo your sentiment about Justin Fry because I thought Fry did a tremendous job at UCLA. I really did. I think that, I mean, he's got some talent to work with. There's no doubt. It's just, again, you have Paris Johnson, who's going to be starting his first game at left tackle, Brian, right? Like he's been inside the last 2 years playing football. He's making his first start at
on
left
the
tackle.
right side.
Right guard. I started every game at right guard last year. You have Donovan Jackson, who I think is slated to start right guard, if I remember correctly, who is a really talented player.
Don't know. That one I don't know.
He's right or left.
I'm not sure because like Matthew Jones has played both of them, and they haven't let anybody in. I was told you're right, but I don't.
Mm-hmm.
We're guessing a little bit because I don't think
Sure.
we know. And Ohio State doesn't release a depth chart.
Right. And so, I mean, so either way, Donovan Jackson's going to be starting somewhere for the first time ever, right? Like he has not started a game at Ohio State. You have Matthew Jones, who has only started 5 football games in his career. He started 2 games last season. And again, I know I'm critical of DeJuan Jones because I think DeJuan Jones actually is pretty talented. And if he lost like 30 pounds, like people have been saying, that's fantastic. But all I know is last year, DeJuan Jones wasn't very good. I mean, if we're being completely honest with ourselves, right? So you have multiple guys that are starting at a new spot for the first time in general in a Donovan Jackson, and you had another right tackle that just wasn't very good last year. Now, if they put it all together, then sure, that offense line is very talented. But the point is, we're talking about a first game situation. I'm not talking about game 10 when they've had all this time, or game 6 when they have all this time to have that cohesion together and do all that type of stuff. I'm talking about one game where there's a lot of moving parts and there's also a new system that has been put into effect. So that's the only reason that I feel the way I do about that situation. I long-term though, think Justin Fry is going to be fantastic for this offensive line. There's a reason that I've been talking about Paris Johnson all summer about potentially being a first-round pick and maybe a top 15 type of player when it's all said and done, because he has so much talent. I'm just talking about a game 1 difference comparative to a full season perspective.
So Archer says that Donovan's going to be on the left side, which honestly is where they should put him. Put the more athletic, my stance on this. Put your more athletic side on the left and your more big physical side on the right. That's how how I feel on that.
Matt Jones rotated in at right guard last year too, so that's good.
And he played some left too,
familiarity.
Right? Because I was at the Nebraska game. I think he actually started at left guard in place of Thayer Munford.
Sounds right.
At least early in the game, and so that's how I would do it. Again, I think athletic on the left, physical on the right. That's how I've always felt it. That's just it's not a right or wrong. It's just how I like it. So, but at the end of the day, all this talk about how good of a jump that Ohio State's going to make with those hires, it comes down to that's where we're coming from. When it comes down to Notre Dame is I still feel even more confident in Harry Hiestand. And the fact is he is working with people he's worked with before. Him and Tommy Rees have worked together before as player, when Tommy was a player, and in 2017. The last time Tommy Rees, Matt Bayless, and Harry Hiestand were all on the same staff, Notre Dame won the Joe Moore Award and ran for 260-plus yards per game. So that's kind of where it comes down to.
Yeah, I keep forgetting to mention Chris Watt, too. Like, that's not a big addition as well. It's a massive addition. Yeah.
So I hope it's a good game. Well, actually, that's not true. I only hope it's a good game if Notre Dame loses. At my age and for what my heart level and anxiety can take, Ryan, I don't necessarily want it to be a close game, but I would be shocked if Notre Dame spanks Ohio State.
Can you imagine if it came down to like a last-second field goal for Blake Grupe? You would be losing your mind.
Hey Ryan, you guys handle the post-game show without me. I'm going to be in the ER. So it's going to be good. We've had enough of that at Irish Breakdown. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a little bit. So, look, here's kind of where we're at, Ryan. So that's kind of our prediction for this game. If it plays out the way that we expect it to play out at the end of the game, who do you see as getting the game ball for Notre Dame? So, end of the game, your prediction comes true. Notre Dame wins 34-31. Who gets the game ball for Notre Dame?
Well, I mean, I almost wanted to split it up to an offensive and defensive one, right? Like my guy on offense was Tyler Buckner, and my guy on defense was Brandon Joseph. I'm going to give it to Tyler Buckner because he's in a big moment. And if they win this football game, I think it's going to be a lot of because they are able to strike a really nice balance offensively between the run and the pass. And I think that starts with the signal caller who has that ability to be a dual threat type of player. So I'm going to give it to Tyler Buckner, but again, I think defense, there's going to have to be a turnover or two if Notre Dame's able to come out with the victory. But I would opt to Tyler Buckner because I think the dual threat ability is going to be big for Notre Dame in this game.
Yeah. I think it's going to have to be that, or it's going to be somebody else that steps up with a big game, some big plays. Let's say a Braden Lindsay, a Lorenzo Styles, an Audric Estime, somebody along those lines is going to be could be that other person. So that's kind of how I see that one being. And to me, honestly, I could also see it being someone on defense. If, like I said, if there's 34-26, I think both teams score 6 times. Notre Dame holds them to more field goals. I could see somebody, somebody that we're not expecting, a Tariq Bracy, a Clarence Lewis, somebody like that kind of stepping up and making some big plays that help Notre Dame win this game. So that's kind of where I come down on that one. So those are our game balls, Ryan, and that is our prediction for Notre Dame, Ohio State. Here's what we got coming up next. We're going to make predictions for the other three big games this weekend. Somebody asked me, are you guys going to predict LSU, Florida State? We have no intention to predict a game of 2 unranked football teams. So we will not be predicting that one today. But we can certainly chat about it on the board. So we made our predictions for Ohio State and Notre Dame. There you have it. We'll be back after the game, win or lose. We'll be back after the game to have that conversation. And we're going to make those 3 predictions. And then we're going to do a little bit of a mailbag, Ryan, after we make our predictions and just preview of these other 3 big games as well. So Notre Dame 34-26 for me. Ryan, Notre Dame 34, Ohio State 31 for his prediction. And we both believe that this is going to be a great, great football game. So, Ryan, let's move on to our predictions of the 3 big games this weekend. I think I tell you, there have been some really good first week ones in recent years, but this might take the cake as one of the best week ones we've seen in a long time. Mm-hmm. Not just the matchups, but the storylines. And, with Notre Dame, Ohio State, you've got Marcus Freeman going back to his alma mater. James Laurinaitis is at Notre Dame. You've got all these different connections between the 2 teams, the lack of playing. And then you go to the first game we're going to preview, which is Georgia versus Oregon. Now, this was going to be a really good matchup no matter what. Then it got really more entertaining this offseason. Georgia, obviously, Oregon loses their head coach. Mario Cristobal leaves to go become the head coach of Miami. There's all rumors about who Oregon is going to hire. They ultimately hire Dan Lanning. Why is that name important? Because Dan Lanning spent the 3 previous seasons as the defensive coordinator at Georgia. The quarterback for Oregon, Bo Nix, SEC guy. One of the more, I think this is a fair thing to say, one of the more polarizing players in college football. Some people think he's terrible. Some people see him as being a guy that wasn't great his first couple years, but was starting to play really good football last year when he got hurt. If you're objective, you should be able to say that. That's this guy right here. Bo was playing really well when he got hurt last year. Is it enough to win this game? It's a neutral site game in Atlanta, right? End of the day, Ryan, this is going to be a fun matchup to talk about. I just don't think it's going to be an overly competitive game. I don't think it's going to be like a 30-point blowout, but here's my issue with Oregon. Whole new coaching staff, new system. You're changing a lot of things. I like Bo Nix. I think he's a good player, but I think he's more of a game manager. He's going to have some good weapons around him, but they're young. I'm just not sure if they match up great against Georgia. I know their offensive line has talent, but losing Coach Alex was huge. Huge. I think he's one of the 5 to 10 best offensive line coach. Like, you want to talk to me about guys that I'm a big fan of offensive line coaches. Obviously, I talk about Harry Hiestand a lot. I talk about Bill Bedenbaugh a lot from Oklahoma. I talk about Kyle Flood a lot. I've been high on Justin Fry going back to his BC days. Coach Alex is in. I'm trying to remember what his last name is. I call him
it's
Morat. Oh man, I have to look it up. But anyway, he's another offensive line coach that I am very high on. But the problem is he went with Cristobal to Miami, and so I think I don't have the same faith that they're going to be able to go out there and. I'll say this: I would be more confident in Miami's ability. Mirabel. More confident in Miami's ability to stay in this game if he was still their offensive line coach. And so that's really what it boils down to me. Yes, Georgia lost some big-time players, but they got some big-time players coming back. Here's the thing for me, Ryan. I actually think Georgia's going to be more explosive offensively this year. I know they lost Jermaine Burton, but they had a lot of guys. Kearse Jackson was banged up last year. If you go back and look at what Kearse was in 19 and I think 20, because I think he actually was a little bit banged up in 20 as well. I'm trying to get my recollection correct. But Kearse was, I thought, on the verge of breaking out in past seasons. He played a lot last year, but he was banged up all year last year. In 2020, he had 36 catches for 514 yards in 10 games. He's a guy that I've always liked as a pass catcher. He's different from Jermaine Burton, but he's healthy. You know, obviously you've got the tight ends coming back. You've got Eric Gilbert coming back. I like Kenny Milton and Kenny McIntosh and Kendall Milton at running back. I think the offensive line is going to still be good. I think Todd Monken is kind of finally getting into his groove offensively. I just don't think Oregon's got the firepower on either side of the ball to stay in this game with Georgia. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I picked the same. I think I predicted my outcome to be 34-17 Georgia.
Yeah, I went 27-16 Georgia. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're relatively in the same ballpark as far as like we think it's a situation where Georgia just they're going to have too much coming back as far as the ability to reload. I know they lost a lot of players, but I mean, you're still bringing back guys like Nolan Smith and your quarterbacks, Stetson Bennett's coming back, and you have two former high 4-star, 5-star caliber running backs who barely even played behind Zamir White and James Cook and Milton and McIntosh. So there's a lot of talent still coming back. Eric Gilbert and Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers.
Ladd McConkey's
well,
their Hunter Renfro. You know what I mean?
Ladd's a very solid football player. So like they have a lot coming back. The Jones kid at left tackle, I think, is going to be a really good football player as he continues to get better. Broderick Jones. So I think Georgia just has enough coming back, and I think that they're just a little bit at a higher caliber right now. And I personally don't really think Dan Lanning gives them like this big like inside track, and because I mean, for the most part, in my opinion, Georgia just had dudes last year, man. So like it was kind of, I'm not gonna say it was easy being a defensive coordinator for them, but like it was not the hardest job of all time being a defensive coordinator with that type of talent that they had. So I think they overwhelm them eventually, kind of wear them down a little bit at the end. So I think that the game might be closer for a while than the 34-17 would indicate for me. Yeah. Like maybe at some point it'd be like 27-17 and a late touchdown.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it. I think Oregon will hit a couple big plays early. I do. Right. I like their talent. I do like their skill talent on offense. I do. Mm-hmm. Especially if Dante Thornton can kind of have a breakout sophomore year, which I think will happen. Is it enough in the opener against Georgia? I don't know. But I think Georgia just wears them down. I do. And there was a comment saying, Georgia lost everyone. The reality is losing starters is not the same as what it used to be because guys play. Yes, Georgia lost some really big time players in the front seven, but they're not replacing them with guys that have never played meaningful snaps in a football game.
And you're still bringing back Nolan Smith, who's a former number 1 overall recruit. You're still bringing back Jalen Carter, who's probably going to be a top 5 draft pick next year. I mean, there's still plenty of guys coming back. Right. There's guys.
I just don't think Oregon has enough, in my opinion, in this game to stop them. I do think it'll be close for 2.5, 3. Well, 27-16 is not a blowout. I just see it being a game that, Oregon's going to have. I think they're going to hit a couple big plays early. I just think they're going to be able to struggle to consistently move the football. Is how I see it.
And I'll say this: I think that Oregon's going to play tough defensively for a while because it's the one thing that Oregon does have coming back is they have guys like Noah Sewell coming back, who's a really good player, and Brandon Dorius up front is a good football player, and Justin Flo, if he's ever able to stay healthy, Brian is a really talented football player, man. So
if he can stay healthy, they have one of the best 1-2 punches a linebacker in the country. That's a big if. If he can stay healthy.
Yeah, so I think they'll keep it tough, but at the end of the day, I just don't think Oregon has enough firepower offensively. Like they lose both their running backs. You're breaking in Bo Nix, and again, I'm not the biggest Bo Nix guy of all time, and we'll see what happens. But I just don't think they have quite enough offensively.
I like Bo Nix more than you. Do I think Bo Nix is good enough to put a team on his shoulders and have him beat Georgia and Atlanta? No, I do not at all. And that's really what it boils down to. So let's move to our next game, Ryan, and that is another very interesting matchup that involves the Pac-12 and the SEC. There's 2 of these matchups this weekend, and in my opinion, I don't honestly think either of them are going to end up very well for the Pac-12 team. But this is one that you and I disagree on. That is number 7 Utah heads to Gainesville to take on the Gators. I'm going to let you kind of start off with your analysis and thoughts on this game and let you give the first prediction, and then I'll kind of come up with sort of why I see it a little bit differently.
I think it's going to be a great football game. I really do. I think this is going to be a closely contested affair. Whether it goes to Utah or it goes to Florida, I think Florida is going to have a kind of a comeback season a little bit, as far as they're going to be a lot more competitive than they were last year. We know, when everything was we understood where things were going under Mullen there at the end there, and the team gave up, if we're being completely honest. I think they're going to be a competitive football team. I think Billy Napier was a good hire. I think he's a good football coach, and I think they have some pieces. We talk about Anthony Richardson on the offensive side of football. Is he able to take a huge step? He's obviously incredibly talented. You have guys on defense like Brenton Cox and Ventrell Miller that have played a ton of football. So I think this is going to be a really close game. I ultimately just think Utah has a better team. I mean, just top to bottom. And I think that you have a head coach in Kyle Whittingham that knows what he's doing, and a Morgan Scalley that knows what he's doing. I know the target's on their back a little bit, but I took Utah in a tight affair because I think that they are better equipped from a coaching experience perspective and a experience perspective from players, where I think that they're going to come out of this one 27-23, a little bit of a more lower scoring game, because I expect Utah to, again, have a really good defense. I expect Florida to have a much improved defense and a better overall team in whole. But I'll take Utah. I opted for the experience factor in this one.
I get that. I do. My whole thing is I feel like Utah is being pushed based on a couple games as opposed to what their overall body of work was. They destroyed Oregon twice. I mean, just physically, emotionally, spiritually, in every way possible, destroyed Oregon last year. It was the weirdest thing, because then you thought, like, the rematch, Oregon's going to be mad and they're going to have a little chip on their shoulder and they're going to come out and be ready for Utah. Nope. It was rinse and repeat. And then, of course, they battled with Ohio State for 4 quarters and just got outgunned. They were missing a lot of dudes. And so I understand the Utah hype. And Ryan, as you very well know, I'm a big Kyle Whittingham fan for a lot of reasons. Number one, his teams are usually really tough. Everybody has those years where you're young and you're still trying to rebuild the culture and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, they're a tough team. But they've just been a team, in my opinion, that doesn't often kind of come out in the big games and play well. And that's kind of been a bit of a knock that I've had on them in recent years. And it's kind of like, remember a couple years ago when everybody was talking about Utah, being a team that was going to go out, and I think it was 2019, and they're going to go out and they're a borderline playoff team because their only loss was early to USC, and they were blowing everybody out. And they went to the Pac-12 title game, and I told people, this is not going to – Oregon is going to smack them. And that's exactly what happened. I like their talent in spots. I don't love their talent overall. I think Cameron Rising is a gamer. I think he's a good athlete. He can run a little bit, more of a scrambler than a runner. He's nice arm, solid player. I love Tavion Thomas at running back. I think their line should be good. I don't love their weapons on the perimeter. And I think they lost some really important players from a defense that I didn't love. And this is still the same team last year that got beat kind of convincingly by BYU, and then a week later lost to San Diego State. And this is also a team that went on the road and lost to Oregon State last year. So I'm not willing to overlook that because they beat Oregon, right? And that's kind of where I come from on this. And so I think the other thing for me is Florida was a dumpster fire last year. I know some people don't like that expression, but they were. They didn't all of a sudden stop being talented. This is still the same team that played in the SEC title the year before and was a top 10 team the 2 years before that. Now, Dan Mullen did not recruit well enough. I think that's one of the reasons that he got fired. He didn't recruit the way he should have. So I don't think Florida is as talented now as maybe they were his first couple of years, but they are still talented. And I think being in the swamp, I think they're going to be a physical football team. That's the one thing Billy Napier's teams were at Louisiana Lafayette. The thing that makes me believe he's going to transition better to the Power Five than some other coaches like him is a lot of coaches win, Ryan, because they get gimmicky. And then you get to that level, and it's like, well, you're gimmicky, but you're getting your face smashed in the trenches, and you can't win. Billy Napier's teams at Louisiana won like an SEC team. They could run the ball and they could stop the run. They weren't sexy, but they were physical and well coached. And I think that translates really well. Here's the other reason. Todd Grantham was just flat out brutally bad as a defensive coordinator. He was to Florida what Brian Van Gorder was to Notre Dame his last couple years. Not as a human being. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying
right.
The stuff they were doing was just so obvious. Like, what are you doing? Like, what made you think that was smart? There were so many things that Dan Mullen did last year. Like, hey, we've got this really talented young quarterback. So let's have him make his first start of his career against, let's look at our schedule, Georgia, and then not start him the rest of the year. It's like there were just so many dumb things that they did. I don't think this team was as bad as they looked. I think you're going to see a very similar Notre Dame 16-17 jump from Florida this year. I'm not saying they're going to win 10 games because their schedule is tough, and they don't have the talent level that Notre Dame had in 2017, in my opinion. I just don't think Utah is the seventh best team in the country. And I think they've got some holes, and I think going to the Swamp and winning that game is going to be a challenge. So at the end of the day, Ryan, even though I respect Utah a lot, I see this being a 27-20 Florida victory. Pac-12 is going to go 0-2 against the SEC in these two marquee matchups. I feel more confident in my Georgia-Oregon pick than I do this one, but that's how I see this one playing out.
I mean, either way, you think it's going to be a good football game.
I do.
Right? Like you don't think that it's going to be like, you don't think that it's going to be Florida up by 14 and then there's a late touchdown to make it look more respectable. Like
no. I mean,
tight contest.
If something like that does happen, it's because Florida scores late to make it that way. Like Utah's got to go for it on fourth down with 5 minutes left. Florida gets it, goes down and goes up by 2 touchdowns. Utah punches one in late. But I think it'll be a competitive game. I'd be surprised if it goes. And if anyone does win convincingly, I would say it would be more likely Utah because Florida's just not there yet. If I'm wrong about Florida, then I think Utah's got a chance to have some success against them. I just, for me, Ryan, I'm not saying that Utah doesn't have this, but I have just kind of always felt like to win these kind of games, it's not against a team like Florida. Florida's going to be, I think, physical. Where I think Florida lacks talent right now is on the perimeter of their of their offense, of their defense. I don't think the perimeter of their defense is what it used to be. The problem is I don't think Utah has the players to expose that the way that you need to win this kind of game. That's kind of my concern. They've got nice receivers, but they have complementary receivers to the run game, not necessarily like that guy that can just run by you all day and make big plays. And I think in order to beat an SEC team on the road like this, you've got to be able to rip off some big plays in the pass game. And I just don't think Utah has the horses to do that. That's another big part of this too, that I think is going to make it a little bit more manageable for Florida State in this game. Because I think the only way Florida loses, in my opinion, is if Utah just jumps on them early and they just they just get overwhelmed. I think if this is going into the fourth quarter, I think this is going to be a game that I think Florida pulls away because I think they're going to be able to physically compete with Utah, but I think in the end Florida's athletes are going to be just a little bit better than Utah's athletes, and that's what's going to get it done. And I also think Anthony Richardson is going to make some plays with his legs in this game, and that's going to then result in because I see him like having some really impressive runs, and then like third quarter to 3-point game, he's running around. Utah safety's like, oh, here he goes again, comes down and and then he throws it over their head for a big play. I think something like that's going to happen. That's more likely to happen for Florida than it is for Cameron Rising. You know what I mean? That's just kind of where I come with it.
Don't disrespect Bad Moon Rising, man.
Not about that. Not about that at all. At all. So that's kind of how I see it. So we're going to stay in the SEC for this last prediction too, Ryan, just because that's just the nature of what this weekend's games are. And number 23 Cincinnati goes to number 19 Arkansas. It is kind of fun. Cincinnati makes the playoff, and a year later they're barely in the top 25. And that is not a disrespect thing as much as a group of 5 team is usually not as positioned to handle the kind of massive personnel losses that Cincinnati had. Arkansas had their fair share of losses as well, Ryan. What's your prediction, and how do you see this game playing out? Because I think we see it somewhat similarly.
Yeah, I really like what Arkansas is doing, if I'm being completely honest. I love Sam Pittman as a coach. I was not a Sam Pittman fan when the hire was made. I had a lot of skepticism. Like it screamed Matt Luke to me for a little bit there. Like, to be very honest.
I agree with you 100%. 100%.
Yeah, like great offensive line coach, sure. Sometimes guys
good
just
recruiter,
don't
sure,
fit as a head coach, right? Like some guys just aren't made for that. And I was wrong about Sam Pittman. I think he's done a tremendous job. I like that they have, a lot coming back on that defensive side of the football, Bumper Pool and Jalen Catalon hopefully being fully healthy. I like the offense that they run. I think it's something where you really accentuate to KJ Jefferson's strengths as a runner and as a deep ball thrower. I know they lost Treylon Burks, but I still think they have enough as far as talent around him to be to create some explosive plays and to be physical more than anything. Like, they have a really physical nature to them and offensive line. So in Cincinnati, for me, Brian, like, I think that Luke Fickell has done about as well as I could have imagined him doing in Cincinnati, man. They've turned that program to a really good team, but the fact is that they've lost a lot of players. And I know we talked about Georgia and coaches, but I know we talked about Georgia losing a lot of players. Georgia, with how they recruit, SEC school national championship winner last year, you can reload a little bit, right? Sure. Like there's some 5-star, 4-star guys that are just kind of waiting in the wings. It's like the Alabama type of thing, right? Ohio State type of thing. Those schools recruit to that degree so that when they lose a lot of great talent, they put in other great talents right kind of into the forefront. Cincinnati, I don't think is at that point, obviously, right? Like they're not recruiting to that high of degree. So when you have that much of an exodus, Desmond Ridder, Alec Pierce, the defensive side of the football with everyone that left.
Jerome Ford, a running back.
Jerome Ford, very talented player. I mean, yeah. So when you lose all those players when you're Cincinnati, I think that there's going to be a little bit of a transitional period. I still think they're going to be a good football team, but I don't think they're going to be nearly as good as they were last year, obviously. So I have Arkansas 37, Cincinnati 21. I think it's a tough draw for Cincinnati early in the year, and I think that Arkansas is an ascending SEC team, and I think they're going to be a really tough out this year.
You said 37-20. I went 30-20. I don't know if Arkansas is going to have the firepower to go for 37 unless it's just one of those ones where, they get a big play early, big play late. Maybe they overwhelm Cincinnati. I actually am more confident in Arkansas getting 37 than I am Cincinnati getting more than 20. I could see it even being more lopsided. I think this offense is going to struggle for Cincinnati. I do. I don't think Arkansas has a brilliant defense. They do have a lot of guys coming back, and they're going to be good in the trenches. The thing that hurts Cincinnati is, again, Ryan, you made the point. You're not replacing them with great recruiting classes. You're now 2 years removed from your best recruiter being gone, right? And 3 years removed from another one of your better recruiters being gone, and Mike Mickens, who did go recruit Sauce Gardner and Kobe Bryant, those guys. And you lost 3 of your secondary starters. I think they lost both of their inside. I know Beavers is gone. Did they also use DeBlano? Is he also gone, or is he back as well?
That's 41, right?
Correct. The Mike. Yeah.
I think they have. It's either he's back or Van Fossum's back.
One is back and one is not. You lost Myjai Sanders. You mentioned. I mean, Alec Pierce was a legit home run threat at receiver last year. Jerome Ford was a legit home run threat at running back last year. You lost all those guys. And if we're being honest, and this was the criticism we had of Cincinnati all year last year, Cincinnati was a team that won a lot of competitive games. And they were really well coached. I mean, they beat Indiana by 14. They were trailing a good chunk of that game. Obviously outplayed Notre Dame. But to me, beat Navy 27-20, beat Tulsa 28-20. I mean, they had a lot of games. You're just like, Tulane, they won 31-12, but they looked bad in that game. They were a tough, hard-nosed team. Not only did they lose all those players, you lost Mike Denbrock as your offensive coordinator. Their DB coach that went to Cincinnati. That it's now 2 years in a row your staff has been rated. I like Luke Fickell as a coach. I don't see him being a guy that's going to be able to overcome those losses and then go on the road and beat a good SEC team, like you said. And I love KJ Jefferson as a quarterback. And they had some really good wins last year. I'll be on board as one of those people that kind of laughed, honestly, when they hired Sam Pittman. I was like, seriously, you hired Sam Pittman? And then, of course, even in the 3-7 season, though, Ryan, in 2020, you could kind of see it. Like you could kind of see it. Like, you know what? Like they're 3-7, but they just have a different feel. They were tough. They were physical. They lost. I mean, they lost by 3 to LSU. They lost by 2 to Missouri. They lost by 2 to Auburn, and they got blown out a couple other times, but, got blown out by Florida, who kind of blew everybody out, got blown out by Bama, got blown out by Georgia. But they were in a lot of those games, had a convincing win over Ole Miss, had a convincing win over Tennessee. Like you could see, like, you know what? Even in the 3-7 year, I was like, I think I might have been wrong about Sam Pittman. And then, so I wasn't completely shocked when they came out last year and won 9 games, even though I would have been completely shocked if you'd have told me that when they hired him pre-2020. And so I love what he's done. He's recruiting well. They've got some transfers to fill some spots. They're tough. They're physical. They're a little too conservative at times offensively, but they kind of opened up a little bit later in the year. I really like what he's doing, and I don't think Cincinnati has the firepower on offense to stay in this game. I don't think that they're going to have the athletes on defense to keep Arkansas in check. I go 30-20, but if I'm going to be wrong on this prediction, Ryan, the wrong that I'm going to have is the spread. I think it'll be a more convincing win for Arkansas. Saying 30-20 is me giving respect to Luke Fickell. Sure. That's why I have it as a 10-point game. If it wasn't for respecting him as a coach, I would have it as a much more convincing loss, because group of 5 teams just can't lose that much talent and then be ready to replace it in game 1. If this game was in a month and a half, I might give Cincinnati a little bit better shot. But they're not going to be able to do what Ohio State, Notre Dame, teams like that can do, Georgia, teams like that can do, which is just you're replacing one dude with another dude, and sometimes an even more talented dude. There is no Sauce Gardner on their roster. That's a generational player. There is no Alec Pierce left coming back. And I like Tyler Scott, right? He's a good football player. He's the guy that smoked Kyle Hamilton for a touchdown, right? But he may step into Alec Pierce's role, as a number 1 guy, but then who steps into his? Who steps into Michael Young's? Who steps into Jerome Ford's? That's where I think Cincinnati's going to be lacking.
I mean, because they got a steal with Jerome Ford. I mean, that kid was at Alabama, right? Like they got an Alabama football player to come play running back for them. And now, Desmond Ridder, I wasn't the biggest Desmond Ridder fan of all time, but like he was a 4-year starting quarterback, like
he was a winner.
Supplement that type of experience.
You use that lame excuse, right? We can use it, but I really felt that about Desmond Ridder. Here's the thing I always respected about Desmond. Thought he was overrated, but when he had his best games, more often than not, was in their biggest games. I mean, he would look like garbage against Toledo and just play terrible, but then come out in the Pac or against SMU when SMU was ranked, or against Notre Dame and make some money throws. I mean, he made some money throws against Notre Dame in that game. To have the guts to go at Kyle. I mean, like I know Kyle got beat on that play, but a lot of quarterbacks would have never seen that happen because they're not even looking at Kyle Hamilton on that play.
That was the seam ball, right? To
the corner Taylor. Route. No, I'm talking about the corner route for the touchdown. I think it was to Tyler Scott. Like they're not even going to look at that throw.
Is that the one where Kyle jumped too early or whatever?
It just got beat on. He got beat on a double move and got beat on the corner route. The seam throw that you're talking about too was also really good.
It was a good ball.
They got Corey Kiner, I believe. I'm looking at their roster now. I thought
LSU?
They got from LSU. He's a good player. I liked him coming out of high school, but he's not the home run threat Jerome Ford is, and that's what they need. They need that guy can be a home run threat. So.
Because their offensive line's not very good.
No, it's not.
It's very average.
Yeah, it's not. So that's kind of how I see this game playing out, Ryan. I think I don't think it's the first 2 games. I think we think are going to be competitive at least for a while, one way or the other. This is one that I don't think is ever going to be in doubt. Even though I don't expect a huge score spread, it's going to be kind of like, like the 2015 Notre Dame Fiesta Bowl lost Ohio State. It was 16 points, but it was never competitive. I think it's going to be kind of one of those kind of games where, it's like, I'm trying to remember, was it the year that Ohio State was Harbaugh's first year when Ohio State was up like 10-3 at halftime, but you just kind of knew like, this isn't really a competitive game. I think it's going to be something like that, to be honest with you. So, Ryan, let's get to some mailbag questions. We do have a lot of super chats and some good questions that we want to put up, so we really appreciate all of you very, very, very much. We're going to get to the super chats first. Tristan March with a super chat. If I were a grad assistant in defensive meetings and suggested that Morrison and Mickey split snaps with following Harrison Jr., while Bracey follows Smith and Jigba, would I get an assistant coach job asking for a friend? You want to take a shot at that one?
Um, it's a funny one. I mean, honestly, Tristan, look, man.
Half of that I agree with. Half of
yeah.
that I actually agree with.
Yeah. Is it the latter? You agree with the latter on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think we will see that. I think just Smith and Jigba's a slot, and we're going to see him matched up against Tariq Bracy a lot.
Well, I posted that on Twitter earlier because I saw an article that had someone say that Cam Hart versus Smith and Jigba is the big like position battle or something like that from an NFL draft perspective. And I'm like, I don't think we'll see that one much at all, right? Like unless Smith and Jigba's taking a substantial more snaps outside, you're going to see Tariq Bracy a ton, right? Like that's going to be the guy. And Notre Dame has to be ready to play in the slot, man. They have to come to play in that regard. And Tristan, like we've talked a lot about Benjamin Morrison and Jaden Mickey. I mean, both extremely talented football players. They need to play. There's no doubt about it. Splitting snaps, I mean, that's a lot to ask of two freshmen to come in and being a platoon as a starter role in the secondary. And I think that we need to give Clarence Lewis a little bit of an opportunity here, right, to prove himself. And Cam Hart as well I think is going to have some matchups against a guy like a Marvin Harrison Jr. And I just think he matches up really well if they do get that type of situation. So I do agree with the second half, though. Like Brian said, the nickel position is going to be very, very important in this football game. We spent a lot of offseason, I feel like, not talking enough about it. And I'm glad that we have over the last week and a half, the fact that Tariq Bracy is a very important player in this game. I think it was 89% of the snaps or something like that last year, and Smith and Jigba was in the slot. So
I think you said it was something like 90 something. Is I think what you said it was something like that.
It was a crazy.
I don't know what the number was. That's just kind of what you had said earlier. If you're going to come to me, Tristan, with a suggestion for somebody to follow Marvin Harrison Jr., it needs to be Cam Hart.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because physically he's a legit matchup for Marvin Harrison, and speed-wise he's a matchup for Marvin Harrison. So that would be the one that I would look at. And then Tariq Bracy with Smith and Jigba, I mean, I think that's your best chance, because the thing about that matchup is I could be wrong on this, but I thought I remember in my notes that I had Marvin Harrison is probably going to be more of a field guy and Emeka the boundary guy, or do I have that backwards?
I thought Marvin was going to be the boundary guy. Wrong about that. I thought, because
I was trying to look at the bowl game and I thought I remembered seeing Emeka beating guys in the boundary. Like the one go route I thought was in the boundary, but I could be wrong on that. But if I expect the outside guys to move a little bit more side to side than we'll see from Jackson Smith and Jigba, based on at least based on last year. I still anticipate they're going to play Jackson outside a little bit more than they did last year. That's just my prediction. We'll see how it goes. I don't think they're going to just leave him in the slot this year as much as they did last year. I'm not saying he's going to be a full-time outside guy, but if I were going to do that, I would have Cam Hart do it. I just would, and then let Clarence Lewis match up against Emeka with help. Is how I would handle it. Right,
man. Marvin Harrison Jr. also just keeps getting taller and taller every time I see someone.
What's he, 6'7" now?
He's 6'5". I thought he was 6'3", but apparently he's up to 6'5" now. He keeps growing, man. It's crazy.
Great. That's great. Love it. He's going to be 6'9",
maybe he'll
power
be,
forward.
Maybe he'll be 6'7" before game time tomorrow.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see him.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. There you go. Thank you for that super chat. Randy, thank you for your super chat, buddy. Appreciate you very, very much. Thank you guys for getting us through the offseason. Hey, thank you all for helping us get through the offseason, because we need you as much as you need us, everybody. So otherwise, Ryan and I are just two creepy guys talking to ourselves every day, and our wives will not be as happy about that. But because you all are here when we talk, we're here and we enjoy it. So we appreciate you. We appreciate you very much, all of you very, very much. Even the people from other fans that come here and have fun and be respectful and all those. You guys make this fun as well. And the ones who don't make it fun, just boot them and don't have to worry about them anymore. Tim Opal, one of my former players, Tim says, hey, Coach, any chance we see 22 personnel? I'd like to see how Ohio State handles an isolated Mayer and Tyree in a slot, preferably in motion. Thanks to everyone on the IB team. So 22 personnel is something that I think we could see, where you'd have, obviously, let's just say either Diggs or Estime with Tyree. And then you'd have two tight ends and then one receiver, correct? And you could see scenarios where you could, I mean, look, I've said this before, Ryan. I kind of like that because you could put your two tight ends on the outside and you've still got your RPO game. And your RPO game in the screen packages gets a little bit more entertaining when you've got Michael Mayer and Kevin Bauman blocking corners on the perimeter. If you're going to leave corners on the outside, there are some matchups that you could find Mayer in. He talked about having, Mayer isolated. I could see something like that, but then you'd have Lorenzo Styles or Braden Lindsey kind of out there as well. I think there's things you can do with motioning Kevin Bauman and Mayer around to create some leverage points on kickouts, or some angles where you're kind of motioning. Let's say Ohio State has a tendency to play with kind of tight fives to an open tackle. Open tackle meaning there's no tight end. Maybe you could bring a guy from across, and then that quick motion allows you to get into a little bit better down block position for maybe a pin and pull than if you were lined up and they bump that guy out to a 7-eye, right? Or 7, right? I think so. Maybe there are some things you could do there with that alignment to kind of create some leverage in the run game. And then, of course, with Chris Tyree in that alignment, you do have some pass game options. It's not something, Tim, I would say that we would see a ton, because I don't think Chris Tyree is a receiver. I think he's a running back. But there'd be some fun stuff I would do out of that, Ryan, where, think about this. If I lined up in an alignment where I had Kevin Bauman as the boundary tight end, and then Chris Tyree is the boundary receiver, I had an Estime in the backfield, and I have Mayer and Lorenzo Styles to the field. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things I would put Lorenzo in the slot, actually, and have Mayer outside. And there's a lot of stuff I could do with motion out of that look, with bringing Chris Tyree in a motion and create some interesting. Hey, you want to stay in the box to defend the run? Then we're pulling that thing and we're running jets, or we're pulling and throwing bubbles, or we're sending him on a boom motion, or not in a boom motion, but a sprint motion across, booms out of the backfield, sprint motion across. See how I react, pull and throw it to him, or have him run, and then you throw a now screen to Lorenzo, and he's got a beeline to that flat defender or corner. Maybe you can do like a cross block where you have Mayer block the flat defender, and then Chris takes off for the corner, depending on how they play it. There's some interesting stuff you could do where you could get 10 to 12 snaps a game out of that look, Ryan. So I don't know if there's a chance we see it, but I'd be interesting. I think there's some things you could do with that. I don't think it's something you're going to do week after week after week after week, but pulling it out in some big games to maybe create some opportunities for some big plays. Yeah, Tim, I love where your head's at, man. Love where your head's at.
I just love in general having two backs at spots. Just, it doesn't even have to be a 22 personnel. Like, I just want to have an Estime and a Chris Tyree in the game at the same situation, because I think that you can maximize space with a guy like a Tyree, and you can still have the hammer to go downhill. Like, you could do those types of things. So.
Well, and what I love about what Tim is saying is we didn't run, I don't remember a lot of 22 personnel. So Tim was one of my players at Muhlenberg. He was a freshman starter for us in 02 when we went to the playoff for the first time in school history. I have to always say that. But we had a look where our starting fullback was a kid named Chris Brown, and our starting tailback was a kid named Matt Bernardo. And we would at times, our number 2 running back was a kid named Mike Markerbrad, and he was really good. Like, he would have started on just about every team we played that year, but Matt was an All-American. And so we would do things where we would put Matt and Mike in the game, like against one team. I still can't believe this worked, but we actually put our All-American tailback. We had him line up as a tight end, and they didn't see it. And we just ran him on a seam route and had a 70-yard touchdown. But we would do things with Mike as that, the fullback, where he wasn't really lead blocking, but we could do things out of the backfield, having him run wheels, having him kind of run delays just right down the middle of the field. And then, of course, there was run game things that we could do with them in the field, in the game too. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of 2-back personnel if you have diverse backs. And I think Notre Dame does with Tyree to 100%. Go with the other 2 kids does definitely have some diversity in that skill diversity in that backfield that allows you to do some unique things out of it, where you're not going to do a lot of 22 personnel if your only 2 backs are Diggs and Estime. You're more limited on what you can do than you can when you have a Tyree or a Kyron last year or Jadarian Price in the future. Those guys, Jaden Lamar is another example. Jeremiah Love would be an example where you get one of those guys with an Estime, with a Diggs. You can do a lot more interesting stuff out of 2-back alignments than you can with just 2 backs of the – like Bama's never done a lot of 2-back stuff because their running backs are basically just in the past, for the most part, have been just kind of cookie cutters. Right. Like TJ Yeldon and Eddie Lacy don't bring you a lot of 21 personnel options unless you're just going to ask one of them to lead block. right? And those are the different things where these kids have a distinctly different personnel or skill traits that you're bringing to the table.
Well, Eddie Lacy during the last couple of years of his Green Bay career probably could have just been a guard if you wanted
defensive tackle.
So yeah, he could have been a play guard, 100%.
There you go.
He was one of the first guys I ever remember having he had a weight that he had to check in with in order to get paid. So he had to be below 250 pounds in order to get a paycheck, which was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
Yep. All right. So Tim, great question. I really appreciate that. Always love it when my guys come in with those type of questions and comments. Christopher Morgan, hi IB Nation. Thank you for the super chat, Christopher. Hi IB Nation, at the airport right now for my flight to Columbus for the entire weekend and excited to go to the game after months of buildup. I feel like a bomb is going to explode tomorrow. Go Notre Dame. I feel you, man. I feel you. I sure hope so. I mean, that's always the fear of games like this, Ryan, is you kind of get all this excitement, and then in the past we'd get all this excitement about it, and then just the game comes, you're like, just a dud. And
I don't want to be want to be deflated. I do not want to be deflated.
Dude. I want BK PTSD to become a thing of the past. And I think going toe to toe with Ohio State, win or lose, makes us all, I think, feel like, okay, that part of this is closer to being over than maybe we thought. And then of course a win makes you feel like, hey, maybe it is over. So yeah,
there's been a few times in the Brian Kelly era where I tried to convince myself that it was different, and then I got very let down very quickly. So,
hopefully that's gone.
Yes.
Christopher Morgan also said, honestly, I like being an underdog. I feel like all the pressure's on Ohio State. I see us Notre Dame 31, Ohio State 26. I can't wait to tweet to Paul Feinbaum when we win.
Christopher, I also have a bunch of tweets that are saved in case Notre Dame wins. So I'm there with you, my friend.
Just be careful about those.
I know.
Fellas. Just be careful.
I know.
Be gracious in victory and defeat is what my advice will be now. I cannot promise that I will be that way if it happens that way, but that's what I'm saying now.
My only advice is whatever I do on Twitter, if Notre Dame wins afterwards, do not do what I do. So use me as an example of what not to
do as he says, not as he does. I completely understand.
100%.
Here we go. Alan Watson with a super chat. Alan says, anything going into the season that really concerns you? Have a Cuban ready for the victory march. Notre Dame wins by 8. Go Irish. I mean, Ryan, I think there's a lot of things that concern you because there are unknowns. I mean, this is true of a lot of teams, right? Like, I mean, look at Alabama. Is Jermaine Burton and Tyler Harrell really going to be able to replace Jamison Williams and John Mechie? I mean, you think so, but neither of them ever played to that level, right? I mean, there's questions Ohio State, they have questions. Georgia has questions. Clemson has questions. Notre Dame has questions.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes it all season fun, but also makes it a little bit nervous when you're predicting the first games. You play a couple games, and you feel like, okay, well, this is what I know about this team, and this is what I know about that team, and here's what I think. But in all the games we predicted, it was all projection. This is what I think Georgia's going to look like without all those guys. This is what I think Arkansas is going to look like without Treylon Burks. This is what I think Cincinnati is going to look like without their greatest draft class in school history. You know what I mean? Like, there's all that stuff, and so the unknowns always concern me. Here's a concern: if Jarrett Patterson starts without having practiced much, does that throw off the timing of the offensive line because he hasn't been in there communicating and all those kind of things? That concerns me. Part of me wonders if maybe you're better off going with the dudes that kind of been going together for the last couple weeks. That's something that concerns me. Is Tyler Buckner going to be able to consistently make the decisions in front of 105, 110, whatever thousand people is going to be the stadium? I mean, that's a concern because I just don't know it yet. The unknowns are always the things that concern me, Ryan, going into a season. That was true when I was a coach. It's true now as an analyst. It's even more so true as an analyst because I haven't been at every practice like I was as a coach, where you kind of had an idea of like, okay, this is our concerning spot, but those are the thing. I mean, are the new starters on defense going to be better than what they had last year, which is what we're projecting? We think Riley Mills is going to be better than Myron. We think Maris is going to be better than Drew White. Different positions, but from an impact of who you added and who you lost from the lineup. We think Brandon Joseph is going to be better than what they had at safety in the last 6 games of the year. We think Clarence Lewis is going to get better. We think DJ Brown is going to be better. But we got to see it. And we got to see it against someone who's not your own team, because it could be like I've heard a lot about, hey, the secondary is a lot better this year. And the secondary, I had even one person go as far as the secondary could be a strength of this team. My immediate reaction is, okay, that's either going to be great news and Notre Dame's playing for a championship, or the receivers have had a really tough spring or tough fall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And they're just maybe not ready. But then I hear from other people like the receivers are having good days and doing good things. And so it's like you just don't know what to believe at this time of the year. And that's what makes projecting openers. That's my dad was like, I'm going to put money on the line. I was like, please don't bet on this. You have no clue. You have not, because like a 13-10 deficit against Wisconsin turns into a 41-13 victory over stuff that there's no way you could have predicted all that was going to happen before the game.
Yeah.
Here's my prediction. Notre Dame is going to return. They're going to go down 13-10 in the fourth quarter. Chris Tyree is going to return the next kickoff for a touchdown. And then Notre Dame's going to have 2 pick sixes in the fourth quarter, and they're going to win 41-13. You guys, I mean, you freaking homer. Like, you're such an idiot. Right? Who predicts that kind of thing? It would have been outlandish to predict that kind of thing. So you never really know how these games are going to go. But we are confident in the analysis we've provided, and we'll see if we're right.
Yep.
See if we're right. Nate Tony with a super chat. Thank you, Nate, very much. Great to finally catch a show live as we are en route from Arkansas to Columbus. Where is the IB meetup tonight or tomorrow? So this is probably a good time to say this. Our plans are changing quite a bit. So I would ask that all of you keep Sean Stiers in your prayers. Sean obviously is the host of IB Nation Sports Talk. He and Vince were going to host the IB Countdown to Kickoff tomorrow. Sean had to get rushed to the hospital today. He is, I believe, still currently at the hospital. He's doing okay now. He had a heart issue, and so he is going to be in the hospital for a couple days, most likely. So he will not be not only not going to the game tomorrow, he will not be hosting IB Countdown to Kickoff. So I will actually have to stay in South Bend tonight. Vince and I will do the show in the morning, and then we'll head to Columbus. And so obviously that's going to change our schedule up a little bit in regard to tomorrow and getting there. So we're going to be kind of, by the time we get to Columbus, it's going to be time to check in at the hotel and then hustle over to the stadium. And so we're not going to have time to really meet up with anybody anywhere at that point in time. So we would appreciate you guys keeping Sean in your prayers. I did talk to Sean about if it's okay to kind of let people know what's going on with him. And he didn't, I think he's going to be okay. Doctor says he's going to be okay. His wife is a nurse, so that's obviously a positive. But they want to keep him in the hospital for at least a couple of days to see, just to see how things are going. And so he had a blockage issue and really scary stuff. So, but he's obviously bummed about not being able to be at the game tomorrow because he and Vince were going to do IB Countdown to Kickoff, and then him and Vince were going to drive to Columbus for the game, and I was going to go up tonight. So that's obviously a little bit of a change. So I did want to make y'all aware of that. We always do this here as a family. We talk trash each other and we battle and we argue and debate. But at the end of the day, we're a family and we pray for each other. We care about each other. So we're asking you all for your prayers and your support for Sean Stiers, that you guys keep him in your prayers and give him some support, show him some love on Twitter. Obviously let him know that you're thinking about him and that you all love the work that he does. Obviously, at least for the first couple of days of this week, he will not be doing the IB Nation Sports Talk show, but my thing is just hey man, just get healthy. We'll get you back when we need to get you, when you can get back. But we'll have your back. But if y'all could keep Sean in your prayers, so that is going to mean, Nate, that we are not going to have any kind of meetup tomorrow. We will, however, next Saturday be having an Irish Breakdown tailgate. The specifics of where just depends on where we're able to get set up, where we can get parking. But we will have an Irish Breakdown tailgate for the Marshall game, and we will have a get together for before the Cal game as well. So we're going to do a lot of those this year. So really appreciate that support for him. I've also seen some people in the chat that are Ohio State fans that are also offering kind words and prayers and support. And we appreciate that very, very much. Because at the end of the day, all this other stuff is sports, right? It's sports. We love it. We're passionate about it. It's our careers, but it's sports. When you start talking about people's lives, that obviously has a whole lot more bearing. So we appreciate all y'all very, very much for that. Very much for that. Now we're going to try to transition back to sports. Michael S. says, he says with a super chat, thank you, Michael. You're an admirer. She's talking to me. You're an admirer of Purdue head coach to explain what he was thinking the last 5 minutes of the game, runs the ball a couple times they win. I'm not going to explain it. Like, there's been like, hey, Brian, I'm sorry. I know you're a supporter. Like, yeah, I'm a supporter of Jeff Brom for what he's done. But I'm not a blind supporter. It was terrible game management at the end of that game. I'm not one of those people that believes that you just run the ball and make them use their timeouts, because then they're still getting the ball with 2 minutes left and no timeouts. But what's even worse than that, Ryan, is giving them ball with 2:20 and they still have both of their flipping timeouts.
Yeah.
And like there was just there just like and then the clock management on that final drive. Like I thought the receiver Charlie Jones had a really nice game last night. Makes that catch, and he was getting ready to start trying to make moves, and then remembered, hey, we don't have a lot of time left, and so he goes down. I thought that was the right move by Charlie Jones. Don't spend 8 seconds trying to juke around, go down. But they didn't call a timeout, and they let like 20 seconds run off the clock. I just thought the clock management in the last 2 drives was brutally bad. And basically they turned a game that they flat out should have won into a loss because of it. And I get that you got to do what you do. And, and so cool. If you don't want to run the ball, then do some kind of bootleg where at least if the quarterback can't find somebody, he goes down, slide in bounds or something, where maybe he runs for 4 or 5 yards or something. But I don't know what your thoughts were on this, Ryan, but I just thought the way he handled the last few drives of the fourth quarter were brutal.
Hey, man, he ruined my pick yesterday. I picked Purdue in the live show, and I felt really good about it until this debacle happened, obviously. So it was not great. I know you can always be a little hyperbolic and critical of it, but I mean, when you watched it was just bad, man. Like it was just awful. I will say this though, Charlie Jones is a little better receiver than I thought he was.
Yeah,
man.
imagine that.
He was all that.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, all right.
Because I'm like, he's just a punt returner. He didn't do a whole lot of receiver for Iowa. Now you're like, wow, Iowa's pass game is a little worse than I thought, because that dude was getting open all
Spencer Petras is awful, and that offense is archaic in Iowa. That's all the conclusions I came to after watching that, man.
But honestly, we always focus on the end. But there were other things that happened in that game that cost Purdue that game as well. Mm-hmm. You fall behind 21-10 at halftime because you let them score on that play that they scored on. Like you lose contain.
Oh, the tight end.
You block. Right? You miss 4 tackles on as the tight end runs to the end zone for a 60-yard touchdown. Brenton Strange is a good player. But
sure.
No.
He's not a 60-yard touchdown guy.
After breaking 4 tackles, that was there was another touchdown that Penn State had where you're just like, did they not do any tackling at all this offseason? It was bad.
That Brenton Strange play was awful too, because if I remember correctly, Brian, that was one of their best defensive players that missed that tackle. Yeah. And I was just like, that first one, I think it's number 10, the safety. Yeah. I'm just like, what the heck is that awful?
That was bad.
Oh, man. It was really bad. I mean, because like half of me was like, wow, awesome for Brenton Strange, but also that was more a product of the defense just being really bad than actually Brenton Strange.
I mean, look, Brenton Strange made a great play, but like it should have never happened. No, it was bad. But they came back and they battled and they took the lead, and then they got the pick 6, and it was a weird game. And then Jason Rose asked thoughts on Sean Clifford last night. Did not play great overall, but was money on the last drive. Would you go to Drew Aller? Here's the reason that I would say no. Number one, he was playing on a bit of a bum knee last night.
Yes.
He had 3 or 4 balls that were just dropped, and Drew Aller had one too. Did you see that corner route he threw to the tight end?
Number one?
That one to the tight end. It jumped over. There was that one too, but he threw one to the tight end that was just dropped. They had, and JT,
he threw a beautiful, it was like an over route to number 1. He was wide open, hit him right
that
in the
one too. I'm talking about the one he fit between like 2 guys that number 44 dropped. I know which one you're talking about. I thought Sean Clifford threw that one.
I think they both threw those. Didn't he throw both of those? No, am I wrong?
No, the corner route is the one Drew Aller threw. Is the one I'm referring to.
Oh, I was talking about
the overthrow that you're talking about. That
Clifford.
was a big play from Clifford. Yes.
Yeah.
So we're talking about 2 different things, but the point is the same. And it was just like, I thought Sean played okay. I thought the offensive line does not look like it's improved that much from last year. Again, first game, but it doesn't look like it's improved that much this year for Penn State. But here's the thing about Sean Clifford. I mean, Drew Aller's the better player. Your potential is greater with Drew Aller, but here's the deal with Sean Clifford. He doesn't have a great arm. He's a good athlete, but not the athlete he used to be before the injuries. He throws some balls. You're just like, what was that? He takes some sacks. But at the end of the game, Ryan, if you're in the game and Drew Aller's Sean Clifford's your quarterback, you always got a shot to win in the fourth quarter. You got to give the kid that. I mean, the kid's and he's just a money player. I mean, I don't know what it is. You could argue, well, maybe you needed him to do the fourth quarter comeback because he didn't make enough plays during the game. I would argue that's not true. I think they should have blown Purdue out. They had a chance to blow Purdue out, but they had some bad drops in that first half. But game on the line, there aren't many quarterbacks that have proven themselves more clutch than Sean Clifford. And that's why I say he's not that good, Ryan, but they are a completely different team when he's not in the game. They really are.
Yeah, I don't think Aller's ready yet.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, did you see that one throw, Brian? I think it was just like an in-breaking route.
The third down?
Aller threw it like 4 feet behind the dude.
It wasn't close, and he threw it about 475 miles per hour.
Yes.
I mean,
and I was like, and they played it back, and I'm like, oh, was he like flat-footed? And I was like, I know his base is there. He just was way behind the guy. Like,
and he was always a raw kid. He's got what you saw last night about Drew Aller is, number one, he's got all the tools you want in a great quarterback.
He's got a crazy
arm. He is big. His arm talent is insane. He's mobile. He's not a runner, but he's mobile. But you also saw why he is not ready. He needs work. But man, he's gifted. But Sean Clifford just wins, dude. And that's part of the reason why I predicted them to have a bounce back year. If he stays healthy, I think they're gonna have a nice bounce back year, in my opinion. But it's because of the talent. James Franklin is a terrible game day coach. And it was obvious again last night. And it's just that in this particular game, he is not the coach who made the worst game day decisions. Yes. That falls down to Jeff Brom, who I have always been a big fan of. And even last night, you're like, dude, this guy can call a game now. I mean, that's the thing you got to come. This dude can call a game. He made some fourth quarter decisions that were just like, wow.
He does a lot with what he has offensively, man. Like, again, Charlie Jones had like 21 career receptions for Iowa. And then what he had 10 last night or something like that, 11. Like, it was crazy. I mean, he does a lot with having pretty average talent, if we're being completely honest. So, outside of Rondell Moore, who has he really had that's like, man, that guy's great. I mean, David Bell. But David Bell wasn't like a crazy talent. Like,
I disagree with you on that. I like David Bell a lot. I think his production was inflated by the system, but David Bell could get open. He knows how to run routes. He's just that savvy kid that just knows how to play. He's not going to blow you away with numbers. He just knows how to play. And the fact is even in games where he's been matched up against better players, he still finds ways to make some plays. That catch he had against Notre Dame last year when Cam Hart was draped all over him, it was a phenomenal catch, that 30-yard route up the seam. So, but he's not, to your point, right? He's not the crazy, insanely physically gifted player that Rondell Moore is, that Ohio State has, and even the Notre Dame has. David Bell just has great receiver talent. He doesn't have great athletic talent, and that's where I would somewhat kind of push back. I think for college. Right.
I hope that Penn State gets better quarterback play just in general, because I'll say this, they had some guys, man. Parker Washington's a pretty talented kid. Nick Singleton looked good in spurts. I know he didn't do a ton last night, but he looked good in spurts, and the tight ends are good. I mean, Theo Johnson is a really talented tight end that didn't even play last night. Yeah, he didn't even play. 44 is okay, but like Brenton Strange is a good player.
Well, and like Keandre Lambert-Smith had that bad drop on the over route, but then comes back and makes a couple big plays for him later. So it's like they've got some you're right? They've got some athletes, but man, they just and God, their road uniforms are so ugly. It's like just literally plain white with a blue stripe. It's just so ugly. Anyway, super chat from David Carpenter. Say, David says, great job. You two as always. Thank you, David. What position group do you think will be the most surprising tomorrow? My prediction is Notre Dame 34, Ohio State 27, +1 turnover to Notre Dame, TB 12, Tyler Buckner 300 yards passing and 90 yards rushing. Those are some good numbers now.
Yes.
I will answer this, Ryan. I'm curious if you have the same thing. I think there's one position group on each side of the ball that is going to surprise people if Notre Dame wins. If Notre Dame wins, here's the two groups that the college football world is going to be talking about Sunday that they're not talking about now. The Notre Dame running backs and the Notre Dame secondary. Those are the two groups that people are going to be like, what? Those guys, look, Ohio State's going to get theirs, but if they make some plays, you're going to be like, this secondary's better than we thought. And those running backs are dudes, and they got a bunch of them. I think that's going to be the two groups. If Notre Dame wins, that's the two groups that people are going to be talking about. But I'll say this, if what he says is true, right, and Tyler goes for 390, that's all anyone's going to be talking about on Sunday if Notre Dame wins this game, just from a national standpoint, a national media standpoint, because that's just what they do, right? They talk quarterbacks. If they win this game and Tyler goes for 390, the hype will begin immediately.
And I mean, honestly, my first impulse was quarterback too. I mean, because I think from a national perspective, like Brian, I don't know if you saw, like I watched Tyler Buckner's interview the other day on YouTube, and you should have seen this comment section, man. Everyone's just like, "Wow, he sounds like a mentally soft kid," and Ohio State's going to kill him, and all this stuff. I'm like, "Are you guys serious, man?" Like,
no, they're not. They're insane.
There's like this perception that Tyler Buckner's not ready and he's not good and whatever. So like,
it's one of those things where you're reading into what you already think.
Right.
You're like, whatever. People are strange.
Yeah, it was so annoying. So yeah, I'm going to say Tyler Buckner's the guy though. And then I'm there with you on the secondary. If the secondary plays well, I think that'll be a big surprise to a lot of people.
If Notre Dame does win, their secondary is going to have to play somewhat well. I don't see them winning 48 to 45. I just don't see that. 82 Slice with a super sticker. Thank you. Also gave us a super chat and asked a question. Thank you very much, 82 Slice. Appreciate you. ND is at least as good as last year's Oregon and Michigan squads, both of which beat Ohio State. I do not understand why Notre Dame isn't given much more chance by the public to win this thing, given that fact. I agree, but I think that it's not so much that people are doubting on Notre Dame because of anything Ohio State has done. It's people are doubting on Notre Dame because of what Notre Dame has done. Like I understand where you're coming from, and I tend to agree with you when I just look at this matchup as just that. Like if people had the ability to just isolate this matchup and look at Ohio State objectively, and what do we know objectively about Ohio State? Lost to Oregon in a game they never led. I don't think they led at any point in time in that game. I don't believe so. They lost to Michigan in the game. They led early, and then Michigan quickly took control. I think Ohio State scored first that game. I could be wrong. I was watching it again the other day. But Ohio State was clearly not the better team on the field that day. They barely beat a depleted Utah team. They made that Utah offense look like 2008 Oklahoma, and they're not. They struggled to beat Penn State, who was 7-6 last year. They struggled to beat a 3-9 Nebraska team. They were losing to Minnesota until Muhammad Ibrahim got hurt. That's just a fact. Okay. He had 162 yards rushing. Didn't he get hurt like late third, early fourth?
Something like that.
They had 162 yards rushing with Mike Sanford Jr. calling plays, right? They had one really impressive victory last year, and that was against Michigan State. And what do we always say? Football is a game of matchups. Ryan, trivia question that I know you know the answer to. What team what team had the worst pass defense in college football last year?
Michigan State.
Their pass defense last year was freaking terrible. And that's, I mean, you can it was terrible. I mean, this is a team that gave up 449 yards to Ohio State and 6 touchdowns, and that was not their worst or second worst pass performance of the season. They gave up 536 yards to Purdue. They gave up 488 yards and a 70.8% completion rate to the Zappy kid at Western Kentucky. They gave up 406 passing yards to Michigan. Michigan threw for 406 passing yards against Michigan State. Guys, Michigan's next highest game was 352 against Maryland. Those are the only 2 games they went for over 300. Michigan won a football game last year, Ryan, by 3 touchdowns in which they passed for 44 yards. That was against Washington. And they went for over 4 bills against Michigan State.
Wait. Say that one part again.
Yes.
How many yards do they have against Washington?
Michigan last year, pass offense against Washington. They went 7 of 15 for 44 yards in that game.
Wow. I do not remember that game. The only thing I remember from that game is Jackson Kirkland getting abused by both Ajabo and Hutchinson in that game. That's the only thing I remember. But But Michigan rushed for 343 yards that game. That'll do.
Yeah, that'll play, especially against a team with no offense like Washington. Yet that team threw for over 4 bills against Michigan State. So that's a terrible matchup for Michigan State. The rest of the games they played, this was not a team that dominated people. They dominated bad teams. So what people are telling me is that Notre Dame is more Maryland and Indiana than they are Nebraska, Penn State, or Minnesota. That's what you're telling me. And I just don't believe that to be true. But why do people think that? Not because of anything Ohio State has done. but because that's exactly who Notre Dame has been in games like this more often than not. And if you think about the 2 Georgia games, those Georgia teams were not exactly offensive juggernauts, and Notre Dame did play them tough. But more often than not, it's been Arizona State 2014, USC 2014, which kind of cancels out Florida State 2014. It's been Michigan 2019. It's been Miami 2017. It's been Stanford in 2017. It's been Clemson in the ACC title game. It's been Bama in the postseason. It's been Clemson in the Cotton Bowl. That's more often than not who Notre Dame has been. And that's why people don't have faith in them. And so until Notre Dame proves that they are not that team anymore, that's what people are going to continue to believe about Notre Dame. And honestly, that's fair, in my opinion. I'd like to wish that people could be more objective in their analysis, Ryan, but we can't also ignore history and just act like those things don't matter. They have to prove, if you don't want, again, hey, Notre Dame, if you don't want people to keep disrespecting you this way, then earn their respect. Because I think respect is earned, but I also think disrespect is earned at times. And Notre Dame has earned that disrespect based on how they've played in these games. And we are hoping and thinking and projecting and predicting that it'll change. Mm-hmm. Brad Center says Dempsey's Food and Spirits is the Columbus Ohirish backer bar and hosting a parking lot party with Rudy on the big screen for tomorrow game party all day. So keep that in mind, Notre Dame fans. That actually sounds a lot of fun. And thank you for the super chat, Brad. Absolutely. That sounds like a lot of fun. Chief Brody says with a super chat, thank you. Ryan won't watch Maverick, but will he at least watch Rudy tonight? I am.
I will. So I was actually planning on watching Maverick tonight. I didn't want to, let anybody into that, but I was planning on doing that tonight. I will not be watching Rudy tonight because Rudy is a very overrated movie. That's
we're going to move on from that.
Another day.
Have to fire Ryan. All right, everyone. Ryan, I'm taking applications for a new director of recruiting. I'll forgive you. I'll forgive you. Potatoes O'Brien with a super chat. Thank you, buddy. People would be surprised by our run game and our passing game to complement it. Estimate is going to roll. Sure hope so. I'm so excited to be there for the game. Flying from Seattle, got a few Irish fans on here. That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm curious how many Notre Dame fans are going to be there because there's going to be a lot of Notre Dame fans just in town for the game, like not even going, hoping to get tickets, but not going. I had a buddy who just paid a couple grand for tickets just last minute. So I'm really curious to see how many Notre Dame fans are going to be at this game. Really curious.
It's gonna be interesting.
Really curious.
It's not a far drive, man. It's only like 4 hours, something like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, depending on where you're from, my buddy's coming in from Pittsburgh, and Potatoes is flying in from Seattle, from Washington. So
that's awesome.
I hope that there's a lot of Notre Dame fans at this game. I really do. I really do hope that. So let's see if we got some more questions here, Ryan. Let's get to some more here. Dexter Domer, pumped for the game. Not sure I can watch the whole show, so wanted to toss out a question. How does this team feel going into the first game versus other years you have covered? Honestly, Dexter, it's hard to know. We just haven't seen a lot of them. We've had access to 2 full practices, and in those practices, Notre Dame wasn't wearing pads. They were just wearing helmets and jerseys and shorts. So it's really hard to know. I just know what my sources tell me. And, my sources last year were consistent. I mean, what were we talking about last year, right? The offensive line's getting killed every day. The defensive line, I mean, we talked about that all the time. Defensive line is destroying the offensive line. The receivers are having a hard time getting off press. Those things were all things we knew in fall camp. And, Jack Cohn is accurate and all this other kind of stuff. What you didn't know was just how bad they'd be in pass pro. Just because, in team, you don't do as much team, and it's hard to kind of really tell when you can't hit the quarterback. So yeah, that's, but I'm hearing good things, but again, it's show me time, right? It's show me time. That's going to be the key. Dexter Domer also said intensity, conditioning, talent, attitude. This seems to have an edge to them right now. Would you take them over some of the better Indy teams since '88? Would you place them? Where would you place them? I'd say 5 to 10. Are we talking about like this current team, projecting this current team? Because if we are, so. I mean, it's hard for me. I have no idea. I need to see them play games first. Here's what I will say. I think this top to bottom has a chance to be one of the 2 best teams that Notre Dame has had in the last 20 years, top to bottom, because that goes back to 2002, right? I think what we don't know, see what some of these other teams have had. So like this team top to bottom, I think is more talented than 2012 team, top to bottom. this team, top to bottom, is more talented than the '05 team. The difference with those '05 and the 12 teams, Ryan, is they had some stars at the top that could elevate others around them. Brady Quinn in '05, and then obviously like Samardzija. In 2012, it was Manti, it was Zach Martin and Tyler Eifert on the other side of the ball. As I've said, that 2012 Notre Dame team could take their top five and go against anybody else's top five. You're talking about Zach Martin, Tyler Eifert, Stephon Tuitt. Who else do you want to choose? Is it Lewis Nix? I mean, who are the guys you want to look at that were big-time players? The problem was 6 through 20 is where they weren't as strong. To me, what I don't know about this team, Ryan, is will they have that level of top five? We think Foskey's there. We think Joseph is there. But outside of those two and Mayer, right? Those three we know. But what's the drop-off after that? Does Cam Hart become a star? Does one of the other offensive guys become a star? I think that's the big question mark. But just God-given athleticism and God-given talent at most spots, I think this has a chance to be Notre Dame's most talented team in 20 years. However, one of the teams I felt was one of the more talented teams at Notre Dame was the 2011 team, was incredibly talented. They had like 5 first-round draft picks on that team. I mean, you had Michael Floyd on that team. You had Harrison Smith on that team. They went, what, 8 you had Darius Fleming on that team. You had Jonas Gray on that team. And what did that team do? They went 8-5. The 2014 was insanely talented. It was everybody from the 2015 team except you had Everett Golson at quarterback. You know what I mean? But what happened? They weren't a very good football team for the whole year. Why? Because they didn't have depth. And so to me, just because you're talented doesn't mean you're going to be good. And that's what we don't know about this Notre Dame team. I mean, we're projecting this win based off what? Watching old film, what we've heard in camp. We haven't seen them play any games, Ryan. And so to me, it would be incredibly irresponsible for me to start comparing this team to past teams. So I'm going to take simply from a talent standpoint, it has a chance to be the most talented team of the last one of the most talented teams. 2015 is still the number one most talented team. And I don't know if this team is going to be better than that team talent-wise. I don't see it. However,
team was skill. That
insane
was team. Yeah.
But I think it has a chance to be with the others. But talent doesn't equal being a talented team doesn't mean you're going to be a good team. And that's the thing that's the unknown right now, Ryan.
Yeah. And I mean, it's Brian, again, I mean, a lot of the talent's a little bit unproven to your point too, right? Like you said, you Foskey's there, Michael Mayer's there, you have Brandon Joseph, who you would put in like that top 5 players, but the drop off is what makes you a little nervous, and it's depending a lot on sophomores. Like there's a lot of sophomores, especially offensively, that you're like, in order for them to be a really, really good football team, you need that class to especially step up. I think, honestly, if we were just kind of coupling groups together, because there was a question of like, what group is the one that like everyone's talking about the next day or the most important team position or whatever. How about this for one? What would the national perception of that sophomore class be if Notre Dame wins that game? If we're being, I mean, could you imagine if Tyler Buckner, Lorenzo Styles, Audric Estime, Logan Diggs, the sophomore offensive tackles, like if all those guys play well and Notre Dame's able to win, it's like, wow, Notre Dame's got some young guns in the sophomore class, man. Like
I would say that what you just said needs to happen if they're going to win.
Yes.
And there's too many of those kids in the lineup for them to win and they not play well. I mean, that's the thing. And that's your point. I mean, your quarterback, your left tackle, your right tackle, 2 of your top 3 running backs, and arguably your top receiver are all sophomores, right? Part of that sophomore class. So yes, you can't win if they don't. So they are a bit unknown. They don't have the lineage that, I mean, Lorenzo Styles, his dad was a known guy, but he's not Marvin Harrison, right? And he doesn't come from a program that's necessarily produced the kind of production that Ohio State has produced. So you are getting the hype about those guys that you're not getting about the Notre Dame players. That's just the reality of it. But, I think that could change a little bit here in the offseason, right? Or in the season if they're able to play well. Because if you think about it, that's where the talent is, right? I mean, that's where the talent is. And that's why, I was happy to see Bruce Feldman put Lorenzo Styles in his freaks list. Because, he sees what we see, or he is hearing what we see, which is this kid's really explosive.
Yes.
And the other thing that I found fascinating is they were asking Chris Tyree the other day who the fastest players on the team were. And he said it was like him, Lindsey, Styles, which we expect. And then he said Tobias Merriweather.
Wow.
So I was like, I'm listening. You know what I mean? So I think there's talent there. It's just fairly, there's an expectation that Ohio State's talent will step up and do well. Why? Because that's what they've done. You lose J.K. Dobbins and you go to the playoff the next year. You know what I mean? Like you lose Justin Fields and C.J. Stroud is, even more productive in certain ways, at least as a passer. And that's what you do. Notre Dame has not shown that they can do that the same way that those other teams can. So I got to see him play first before I'm going to be able to comfortably put him in a situation like that. But I do like the question. And I'll tell you what, let's address this at the end of the year, Dexter Domer. Come back to us at the end of the year and see where they are, and then we can have a more fun conversation. Michael S. says, you're right about Ohio State 2021, but they now have a new proven DC and assistants. How much does that change your perspective? We already knew that. We knew that they had a new defensive coordinator and assistants, and we discussed that. So I don't really know what else we can say. It doesn't change my perspective. It doesn't change my perspective at all of what we said about the team today or yesterday or the day before that. We're already taking those things into context, Michael. So I'll say this.
We've been talking about that for a few months. It's not even just like this week.
If they didn't make those changes, I wouldn't have any. I think there'd be a lot of people predicting Notre Dame to win this game if they didn't make those changes. I think there'd be Ohio State fans predicting Notre Dame to win this game if they didn't make those changes. If they would have left Matt Barnes and Kerry Coombs in charge of that defense going again, which is exactly what Brian Kelly did with Brian Van Gorder. I mean, think about it. Bringing them back for a third year, that's how asinine what Brian Kelly did was. Because how long was Kerry Coombs was running that defense for 2 years, correct? If I remember correctly. Let me just look this up real quick. He started in 2020 and then started last year, right? So, yes, 20 and 2021, he was the D coordinator. Ryan Day removed him in the second year, even though they were winning games, right? This thing, and that's similar to what 15 was, Ryan. They were still winning games, and Ryan Day made that move. And so in 2015, the equivalent of he made that move. If he didn't make that move, I think there'd be Ohio State fans. Ohio State fans are in the chat. If Ryan Day doesn't make coaching changes this offseason, which is what Brian Kelly did not do, he did not make the changes until it was too late. How many of you guys would be predicting Notre Dame to win this game, or at least be thinking it was going to be more competitive than you think that it is? I bet you a lot of them would, because they know how badly they were coached. That's the only reason that we think this is going to be a game, Michael, is because of that. I think if Notre Dame – because, as you said, I do think Notre Dame is better than Michigan last year. I do think that they're better than Oregon last year, talent-wise. And those teams took it to Ohio State. So, yes, if they didn't make changes, this I don't think would be a competitive game. But Ryan Day did make those changes, which is why I think he is showing himself to be I think is why I would take – if you had to say who would you rather have as your head coach, him or Lincoln Riley, I'm taking Ryan Day. Because I think Ryan Day understands you've got to be good on both sides of the ball. You can't just score 45 a game. You got to score 45 and stop people from scoring. I think he understands that. And that's why I said I have a lot more respect for him as a coach than I do Lincoln Riley at this point in time. Patrick Tolan with Super Chat. Thank you, Patrick. Not heading out to the game, but my in-laws are taking my kids for the night, and I'll be lakeside by the TV with the best former Leprechaun in 20 years. That's awesome. That's awesome. That'd be a fun place to watch a game. That really would be just kind of chilling. Got the TV out by the lake. And the wife took the kids. That'd be a lot of fun too. We got Quinn Kibler with a question. Mentioned this last night, but interested in B. Ryan's take. Is it wrong for me to say we should cheer for Ohio State for the rest of the year and they should do the same for us regardless of outcome? Well, I think if Ohio State wins, doesn't matter what Notre Dame does, because they're now in control of their own destiny. They went out and the winner of this game is completely in control of their own destiny. It doesn't matter what the other team does. If you're undefeated, you're in. I mean, it's as simple as that. I do think if you're smart and you know that, hey, look, it's hard to run the table. I mean, Ohio State's lost. If I would have told you before the 2018 season, Ohio State's going to go on the road getting destroyed by Purdue, you'd be like, dude, come on, seriously. Purdue, really? But that's exactly what happened. If I'd have told you, hey, Ryan, before the 2017 season, hey, listen, man, just to let you know, they're going to go on the road to Iowa and give up over 50 points. Like, Brian, dude, be serious. Like, this isn't
Brian,
funny.
Stop joking around,
Stop
man.
messing around, dude. But like, so you never know what's going to happen. So you always want to give yourself a margin for error. So yes, the winner of this game absolutely should be hoping that the team on the other side, but even more so, the team that loses should root for the team that wins to run the table, because now if Notre Dame loses to Ohio State, then they're 11-0 at the end of the year. They're like, hey, we lost to Ohio State in a close game, but look, they're 13-0 and the number one team in the country, number two team in the country. And then vice versa. If Ohio State loses to Notre Dame, they need to hope that Notre Dame runs the table. Because here's the thing. If Notre Dame loses once, what's Notre Dame going to have? It's even more true for Ohio State because they're at home. They would lose at home to a lower-ranked team. If they lose at home to a lower-ranked team and Notre Dame, let's say Notre Dame loses to BYU, that's going to be a tough argument to say that a 12-1 Ohio State against an 11-1 Notre Dame that has a win over Clemson and a win over USC, something like that, you're better than. So if you're Ohio State, run the table, hope that Notre Dame, because you're going to need Notre Dame to lose twice if you're going to get in over Notre Dame. But if you're sitting at the end of the year, Notre Dame goes 12-0 and you're 12-1, yeah, you're both getting in. So I would think that the loser should root for the winner to keep winning, as opposed to hoping that they lose twice in case you stub your toe.
Yeah. Brian, would you like to rebuttal to this Georgia fan real quick that says Notre Dame has to go undefeated? That's why you'll need to come to the SEC.
Well, you know what, though? Here's the thing. I appreciate that he was respectful in that. I mean, like, for him to say –
he's been respectful in the chat.
Yeah, overall. For him to say come to the SEC tells me there's a level of respect he has for Notre Dame, and he wants Notre Dame in the SEC. So I appreciate that. I understand where you're coming from, because that's a lot of what the media has said, Legend, and they say this a lot. Notre Dame's got to go undefeated. They got to go undefeated. And my rebuttal has simply been there's no evidence of that, right? So here's the things that I look at and say why I think that is nonsense. Number one, ESPN tells us all the time, you got to win the conference championship. Well, in 2016, Penn State was the Big Ten champs, beat Ohio State in a head-to-head. Who made the college football playoff that year from the Big Ten? It's Ohio State. So that what a head-to-head matters and win championship. 2017, who was the national champion in 2017, Ryan? It was Alabama, correct?
Yep. Okay.
2017. Who was the SEC champ in 2017?
Was not Alabama.
It's Georgia. Yeah. They beat Auburn. Auburn beat
that game.
Bama. But Bama got in. More evidence of it. Okay, well, they're the SEC. Okay, we just gave you a Big Ten and an SEC team, right? Here's more evidence. Notre Dame in 2015 lost game 2 to Georgia? They beat Temple in the opener and then lost to Georgia in week 2, correct? Because then Georgia beat App State in the opener, and then because Jacob Fromm got hurt in the opener against App State and then started the next week against Notre Dame. So yes, it was week 2 for both teams. Notre Dame beat Temple in the opener and then lost to Georgia. So Notre Dame loses in the second game of the year and then wins out and smacked people. I mean, blew out BC the next week, blew out Michigan State the next week, blew out NC State, blew out USC, blew out North Carolina, just blew everybody out, climbed all the way up to number 4 in the poll. The reason Notre Dame fell out in 2015 is because they had an ugly win over Wake, an ugly win over a 3-9 BC team, and then lost to Stanford. 2015. 2015 is the year they lost to Clemson later in the year. So that's even a different one. 2017 is when they lost to Georgia in the second game of the year and blew people out. Excuse me, I said 2015. They climbed up to number 4. That's 2015. And that was with 2015. They only beat one ranked team all year. That was Navy, and they still climbed up to number 4. 2017 is when they lost to Georgia in game 2, blew people out. That team got all the way up to number 3, Legend. In the college football, not the AP or coaches, the college football playoff rankings had the number 3, Ryan. And then the rest of their schedule, the last 3 games, they beat Wake Forest 48-37, and that climbed them up to number 3 in the polls. They had on the road against a top 10 Miami, home against Navy, at Stanford, who was ranked in the top 25. You're telling me Notre Dame goes from 3 to out of the playoff if they have a road win over a top 10 Miami team and a road win over a ranked Stanford team at the end of the year? Because they're not in a conference? There's just no evidence of that. So to me, Legend, I look at it like this: is we have 2 options, Ryan. We can listen to what the media says, or we can look at what the committee has done.
Right.
And what the committee has done is they're going to look at the end of the day, they can have all the criteria they want. They're going to take the 4 best teams. That's what they're going to do. Now, have they always gotten the 4 best teams? I don't think so.
No.
But more often than not, I think that they have. And then the years that we would question, I didn't think Bama deserved to be in 2017. They won it all. I didn't think Ohio State deserved to be in 2014. I thought the way they did it was wrong. But guess what? Ohio State won it all. So even the years where you could kind of question who got in, those teams ended up winning. So you kind of hard to push back on who got it right. So, and best teams, they look at it as overall resume. And so when you look at that, I think that's why I would say that there's just no evidence that Notre Dame needs to be in a conference other than just because ESPN said so. Well, why does ESPN say that? They need them to say that. So you can say that we need to join a conference to not get shut out, but Notre Dame has never gotten shut out when they had a playoff-worthy resume. And the comeback to that is, well, last year Notre Dame won 11-1, and they didn't make it. They didn't deserve to make it last year. Y'all, if anything, the committee overrated Notre Dame last year because they were 11-1 with 0 top 25 wins, and they still were 5th, Ryan, in the top 25. So you can say all you want, like Devin said the same thing. Look, y'all can believe the ESPN hype all you want. I'm an evidence guy, and the evidence has shown that when Notre Dame had a playoff-worthy resume with a loss, the committee absolutely had no problem putting them in the top 4. And then somebody says, well, the year they got in with a loss, they got in because they were in a conference. Well, that's not really a good argument either, because the only reason they had a loss is because they were in a conference. Because if they weren't, like if the ACC would have said, hey, Notre Dame, come in, we'll give you a regular season schedule, but because you're not a permanent member, you can't play in the conference championship game. Notre Dame would have been undefeated going into the playoff.
Yep.
Their loss came in the conference championship game. So to me, it's just it's not a good argument, and I get why people think that because ESPN says it constantly. But the committee has never done that. Committee has shown they don't give a crap what ESPN says about the polls. Remember the year that Kirk Herbstreit was trying to push for Georgia to be in with 2 losses? You know, it's like, come on now. And the committee was like, no, we're not doing that. So just like the conference championship only matters when it actually gets the 4 best teams. I mean, they literally took an Ohio State team that had a loss to the Big Ten champ over the Big Ten champ in 2016. Right? I mean, you know, it just doesn't matter. It really just doesn't matter. Got some more here, Ryan. Tommy Guns, B. Ryan Mailbag. What stadium will you be sitting in to cover Notre Dame's final game this season? Who's the opponent and what's the final score? Well, let me look. Go ahead, Ryan. Do you have an answer to that?
I do not have an answer. Tommy just wants us to say that Notre Dame is going to win a national championship. That's what he's trying to get us to, right?
I don't know what the final score is going to be of that final game. I don't know what their opponent is. Yeah. But I will say that I believe that where is it? I'm trying to find it here. Where is the game? Give me 1 second here, folks. Let's see here. The game. Why doesn't this NCAA suck so bad? They have a site that says where the thing, but they don't have where the game is actually going to be played. So where is the 2022 national championship game going to be played? I think it's Los Angeles is what I think it is going to be. Ryan?
In the Coliseum?
Is it? Yes. So I think it's going to be I would imagine no. I would imagine it would be in where the Super Bowl is played.
Yeah.
So the one with the Rams playing. So I believe it would be that. Yeah. I'd be shocked if the NCAA, even as dumb as they are, had a game in the Coliseum. That place is a dump.
I know, but I don't put anything past the NCAA.
This is true. Well, they do like making money. Yeah. And they will definitely make more money playing there. Yes. Yes. So I believe the last game that we'll cover is in Los Angeles. However, Ryan, that's going to if that were to happen, that would put me in a conundrum. Because I have vowed to never step foot in California ever again. I will not break my vow to cover a game at the Coliseum or Stanford, but I would probably make an exception if they played in the Rose Bowl, like the real Rose Bowl, not the Rose Bowl in Atlanta or New Orleans or wherever they played 2 years ago, or if the national title game was in LA, I would have to, or San Francisco. I'd have to make an exception for that. I would.
Huh.
I would. Yeah.
So you're going back on your word.
In that instance, yes. There's some other things I won't go back on my word on, even if it means I can't attend games. But honestly, that might be the reason why I couldn't attend the game anyway. So it may not even be my choice. And that I would not go back on. That I will not change my mind just to cover the game in California. No way. But if it's just about not going to California, that's more of a personal stance rather than the other stance that I've taken. So anyway,
how much money would I have to give you a year to live off of to go live in California? Is there a number or is there not a number? There's no number.
It's not about money. It's not about money. Well, that's a small part of it, but no, there's a million reasons why I wouldn't live in California. No disrespect to people that do, but I just, no, not happening. Not happening. Plus, I watched the movie 2012, and that was the final straw for me. Like, nope, not living there. I am not the idiot that's going to live on a fault line. Well, there's one in Indiana. But yes, there you go.
Eric Pruitt in Indiana?
I don't know. I'm just saying someone would probably come back. Well, there is one. Well, I wouldn't knowingly live on a fault line then. Okay. Eric Pruitt says, I haven't seen any dominant defensive play so far, mostly shootouts. Can we survive a shootout? I don't think so. I mean, can they? Yes.
We're just talking about Ohio State, right?
Right. Can they? State, yeah. Can they? Sure. Will they? I wouldn't. If you were to tell me that this is going to be a shootout, that means Notre Dame can't stop C.J. Stroud. And right now, the one thing I have more confidence in is if Notre Dame can't stop C.J. Stroud, I have a little bit more confidence that he's going to make the plays needed than Tyler Buchner. I think Tyler Buchner is going to lead Notre Dame to victory because I think the team is going to be better. But if Notre Dame can't stop C.J. Stroud and it gets into a shootout, my confidence level goes down for this game.
If this game gets near very close to the 40s or into the 40s, I don't think Notre Dame has much of a chance. I've been very honest with that one. I don't want to get in a shootout with CJ Stroud and those wide receivers. I just don't want that to happen. Like that's not how Notre Dame wins this game. That's not really how Notre Dame's going to win in general, if I'm being completely honest, but it's
not against these kind of teams. Yeah. No, they're not going to win 48, 45
wide open. Yeah. Not like the Alabamas, the Ohio States, the guys that could throw it around the yard. Like this is not the game that you want that to happen. So
at least as of what we know now. That would be my thing.
Things could change, but it's definitely playing into Ohio State style more than what you want your style to be. 100%.
Right. So good question. Josh Amundsen, how do you feel about the playoffs if the game is competitive, but we still fall short? Look, Josh, I've said this a couple times now, and I'll repeat it because I know not everybody watches every show, definitely. But what I have said all along, Ryan, I've been consistent about this, is I think the loser of this game runs the table. I do. I think that, look, I predicted 11-1. I can't tell you who the loss is going to be. It could be tomorrow night. I don't think this is a team. I don't think many teams are going to go undefeated this year. I really don't. I think this is going to look a lot more like the first 5 or 6 playoffs, Ryan, where early on, really not many teams at all were undefeated. Like you had, I think Clemson in 15 was undefeated, I think, going in. Like Nick Saban, the 2020 team was his first undefeated champion since the 2009 team. And, in 2014, for example, Florida State was undefeated, and then they went out and got blasted in the college football playoff. But in 2014, Ohio State had a loss. And I'm trying to think who else. Alabama, I believe, had a loss that year too, correct? Or am I wrong on that one? I believe Alabama also had a loss that year. I believe. I could be wrong, but I believe that they did. Let me just kind of go look at the different years. I just want to try to remember. But there was a lot of years. So 14, Bama had a loss. Oregon had a loss. Ohio State had a loss. Florida State was undefeated. In 15, Clemson had a loss. Clemson was undefeated. Alabama had a loss. Michigan State had a loss. Oklahoma State had a loss. 2016, you had Alabama was undefeated, but Clemson had a loss. Remember they lost to Pitt. Washington lost to USC, and then Ohio State had a loss. They lost to Penn State, as we mentioned earlier. In 2017, all 4 teams had a loss. Clemson had a loss. They lost to Syracuse. Oklahoma had a loss. Georgia had a loss, and they lost to Auburn, who they then beat in a rematch. And then Alabama also lost to Auburn, I believe, in 2017. And then 2018 is when you started to see things change a little bit. And in 2018, you had 3 undefeated teams. The only team that had a loss was Oklahoma. Bama, Clemson, and Notre Dame were all undefeated. In 2019, 3 of the 4 teams were undefeated. And again, Oklahoma was the only team that got in with a loss. And then in 2020, you had 2 undefeated teams, and then Clemson had a loss to Notre Dame, and then Notre Dame had a loss to Clemson. So the 2 teams that had losses beat each other in the regular season. So, and then of course last year was different as well. Last year kind of got back, Ryan, a little bit to the way it used to be, which is all 3 of the 4 teams had losses. Cincinnati was undefeated. 3 of the 3 teams had losses. I think that's going to be more of like it was. I think there was a greater parity from like 17 to like 20. There was greater parity at the top in some of those leagues. I think the SEC the last few years is like, I bang on Brian Kelly a lot, right? Brian Kelly's not a bad football coach. The head coach at LSU has been improved upon, right, from Edo, I believe. Florida, good hire, right? Mississippi State getting Mike Leach, good hire. Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, really good football coach. Josh Heupel's turned out to be a really good hire. Mark Stoops has done a great job at Kentucky. Obviously, you have got Kirby there. South Carolina hiring Shane Beamer, I think, was a great hire. And if you can keep him there for a while, I mean, so I just think the quality of the SEC is getting better. I think the Big Ten has made similarly good hires in recent years. Maybe bringing Brett Bielema to Illinois, they're going to be a good football team soon. There have been some really good hires in those 2 good leagues, which to me is going to make for more competitive leagues. And so I think we're going to get back to having more of the 1-loss teams. So to that end, I think a Notre Dame team with 1 loss is still very much in the thick of things as long as it's competitive, as you said. I think they beat Clemson. I think that because here's the thing, if they beat Clemson, they basically knock the ACC out. Yeah. A 12-1 Clemson is not getting in over an 11-1 Notre Dame team that beat them, in my opinion, because what will be the big win that Clemson is hanging their hat on that year? South Carolina, Pitt, Wake Forest, Miami. You know, there won't be that where Notre Dame will have Clemson. So, and I think the Pac-12 could get eliminated in week 1. I do. I think if Utah and Oregon both lose this weekend, Ryan, Pac-12's done. USC is not going undefeated this year. It is not happening. I think, and I don't think the Pac-12 teams can go on the road, lose to an SEC team, and not even like the elite SEC teams, really. All Georgia is, but like Florida's not going to be, and still have a shot. So that's what I think. I don't know if you agree with that, Ryan, but I my opinion of Notre Dame making the playoff does not change if they lose this game competitively. It just means the margin for error has gotten. I mean, you're now in single elimination for the next 11 games. That's basically what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, you can't go 10-2 and make it at that point, right? Like you have to.
It would have to be the craziest year of college football ever.
Could you imagine? I mean, wouldn't put anything past these last couple of years, man. But it would be interesting to see.
Like, remember USC started off like 1-3, and by the end of the year they're like 8th. It's about as good as you're going to get with 2 losses if you're Notre Dame. Because here's the thing: Notre Dame wouldn't. That's Notre Dame's chances to make the playoffs would be hurt by not being in a conference if there was some crazy scenario in which there was a bunch of 2-loss teams. Because then they wouldn't have that final chance to have like a 2-loss team could go win their conference championship. Because then they'd all be severely flawed. And then that when you're picking between severely flawed teams, I think that's when championships matter a little bit more. But if one team is just clearly a top 4 team and they have 1 loss, you're going to give that team a little bit more benefit of the doubt than you would some other people, in my opinion. That's just kind of how I see that playing out.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that completely.
Yeah. Yep. All right. We've got some more. Dexter Domer. Indy beats them 2 out of 10 times. Not sure this is one of those. Notre Dame has talent, but it is unproven. And that's the comment I was responding to earlier about I just don't know how you can look at Notre Dame and say they're unproven and then not say the same thing about Ohio State. Ohio State has, I would argue, more unproven players than Notre Dame. The difference, however, is Notre Dame's unprovenness is in the spotlight positions. Quarterback, really is the only one. But Notre Dame, to me, has every bit as much proven commodities in the pass game as Ohio State does. Michael Mayer's every bit as proven as Jackson Smith and Jigba. Braden Lindsey and Lorenzo Styles are both more proven than anybody that Ohio State has. They may not be more talented, but they're more proven. Right. Cam Hart, with all due respect, is more proven than Denzel Burke, right? Brandon Joseph is more proven than anybody that Ohio State has in their secondary, including Ronnie Hickman, who's played a lot of football. So that's the thing and Isaiah Foskey is more proven, and Jason Adamiola, and I would even argue Riley Mills is closer to where Jack Sawyer and JT are as provenness than any of those guys are to Jason Adamiola, Howard Cross, or especially Isaiah Foskey. I mean, what Riley Mills had last year? 3 sacks, right? How many sacks did Jack Sawyer have last year?
Yeah,
3. How many sacks
Yeah.
did Zach Harrison have last year?
3. Yeah, I know
Right.
that one.
So if we're going to talk about provenness, Ohio State's got a lot to prove. The only difference is there's an assumption that Ohio State will do that. Why? Because they've already proven it, and they have a proven player at the position that matters most. And that's where I do understand this sentiment, is because they are proven at quarterback, and that's very important. That's very important. We're not dismissing that at all. And honestly, if CJ Stroud, if you took him out and put in Kyle McCord, I've said this to you, Ryan. I think Kyle McCord's going to be a star. After CJ leaves, I love Kyle McCord as a quarterback.
You know, my the lady that was my co-op when I was doing my student teaching is best friends with Kyle McCord's mom.
Okay, because he's a PA kid, right?
Out there. Yeah, he's a Saint. Is he St. Joe's? Wait, where do you go?
I think he's eastern part of the state, which would make
sense. It's definitely Philadelphia.
I think he's going to be a star.
Yeah,
but let's just say hypothetically that the NFL got rid of their "you have to be in college for 3 years" rule. And let's assume that happened, and Michael Mayer still decided to come back to Notre Dame. And let's just say CJ wouldn't. I don't want to say that he got hurt, because I hate that scenario, because I hate talking about players being hurt. But let's just say whatever reason CJ wasn't playing in this game. I think the tune would change, because yes, Kyle McCord's talented, but he'd be unproven. Right. You know, let's just say something happened where CJ backed up let's say they got a grad transfer last year and that guy started over CJ, and now CJ's going in. You know, there'd be a lot of the Ohio State fans would have the same optimism about CJ Stroud as we have about Tyler Buchner. And that's where I think a lot of Ohio State fans are kind of missing the boat. Like, well, your guy's unproven. I'm like, yeah, but you guys were super hyped about how good CJ Stroud was going to be last year. And why? For good reason. Because the kid's really flipping talented. Well, so's Tyler Buchner. You know, so that's kind of where it comes from at this point in time. I like McCord a lot, but if he has to take over for CJ this year, he's going to be unproven, where CJ's proven, and that's where there's a level of optimism. So I understand it. I understand.
There was one time where CJ Stroud was unproven as well. So everyone has to go through that justification period.
Yeah, if you have talent, you have talent. You're going to be good, right? Talent always rises to the top if you have good coaching, and that's the biggest thing for me. YouTube, Salty Virginia Peanuts asks, will Al Golden's skill at second half adjustments, as with the Bengals last year, translate to Notre Dame? I hope so.
Let's hope.
Right,
we have no idea. He didn't call defense, but we'll see. We'll see.
Now, we have heard a lot from people that he was very heavily involved in adjustments and third down defense, and I don't know if any of that's true, because I don't follow the NFL, and I definitely don't follow the Bengals. And so, you know, to me, when I look at it, Ryan, to me, adjustments are as much about a staff as they are about a coach. And I think I'm a big believer that the best teams at making adjustments are not the teams that have the best coordinator. They're teams that have the best staff, because in a game, every coach is looking at something different. Tommy Rees can't possibly go into halftime knowing exactly everything that's happening along the line, on the perimeter, at quarterback, and all of it. That's why you have to trust your coaches, right? You got to, hey, Harry, what are they doing in there? What do we need to do? And he says, hey, here's what's going on. Hey, Dylan, why are we not picking up those Mike Fires? Okay, here's what they're showing us, and okay, cool. What are we going to do about it? And here's what we're going to do about it. But you need that staff to, even if you're the one making the adjustments, you need that input to be confident that this is what we're seeing. Same thing on defense. Hey, Mick, what are they do? Are they, hey, look, here's something they're doing. Look, they've reduced their splits based on what we were expecting to see. And when they're reducing those splits, they're getting to these concepts. And so we were planning on having our corners chase across on drag routes, right? Let's say hypothetically that's the case. We were going to chase instead of switch on some of the over stuff. We'll switch on the under stuff, but the deep over stuff, we're not going to switch on. So what Ohio State is doing is they're reducing our splits, which makes it harder for the corner to now get down on him pre-snap wise, and they're just outrunning us. Okay, cool. That's what we're seeing. Now, Al Gold may not be able to see that difference between an 8-yard split and a 6-yard split from his role on the field. So you've got to trust Chris O'Leary and Mike Mickens to see that, communicate that, what they're saying, and then also what their players are telling them. And then as a staff, you say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to change it up this way. So adjustments can't just be about Al Golden and Tommy Rees. They've got to be about Tommy Rees, Harry Heastand, Dylan McCullough, Chancey Stuckey, Jared Parker. On defense, it's got to be about Al Golden, Al Washington, Mike Mickens, and Chris O'Leary, and James Laurinaitis, and hopefully Marcus Freeman. Right? So, but Al Golden at the end of the day has to be the one leading that ship. And so you hope that he can bring that to the table. And but that's going to be a key because Ohio State is a pretty good team at making in-game adjustments more often than not. I think what hurt them last year is I don't think Ryan Day had confidence that he could go to his run game last year in big games. He did not look like a coach that had the same confidence in his offense last year running the ball as he did in 2019 with J.K. Dobbins. And Justin Fields as their quarterback. Let's be honest about that too. It's not that he hasn't just run the ball in big games. It's that he didn't seem like he had the confidence to run the ball in those big games last year. And I think that's why he made the move for Justin Fry. So I don't think it was similar to what we talk about with Tommy Rees, right, Ryan? It's like, well, why didn't Tommy Rees make second half adjustments? Because we tried, they didn't work because you couldn't block anybody, right? We saw a little bit of that against Michigan last year for Ohio State. There was adjustments that you could see them trying to make. They didn't work because they couldn't block David Ajabo and Nate Hutchinson.
You have to have the tools or you have to have the tools to adjust, right? Like you can't just be like, oh yeah, just adjust. Well, we can't get off a press and we can't block right now. What do you want me to adjust to, right? Like, I mean, you can only throw in a screen every once in a while. You can't make that the staple of your offense, right? You can't run a draw every play. Like there's just not, if you don't have the ability to adjust, then you can't adjust. It's very simple.
There you go. There you go. Kyle Wade, last couple here. Kyle Wade, question if there's time, do you think you'd do FCS type of show every so often, or is that just too many additional teams? You know what might be fun, Ryan, because I know that your buddy Joe, Joe DeLeon, is it DeLeon? Is that how you say it? DeLeon? DeLeon does actually an FCS podcast, right?
Yes,
correct? So Kyle, do you know the name of it? So Kyle, if you're interested in FCS stuff, why don't you look up Joe DeLeon show?
It's Believe in FCS Football podcast.
In BLEAV, correct?
BLEAV. Yep.
Okay. You know what might be fun is maybe you talk to Joe if there's ever any like epic FCS matchups, like North Dakota State plays somebody. Maybe we might throw those in there. That'd be fun.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, so we may look into that, Kyle. More often than not, we won't. We'll keep to the games that matter. But like if there's some big Fs, like if like let's just say JMU was playing North Dakota State in a regular season game, I'd talk about that. Right?
JMU just got elevated.
They're not yet, are they?
Team now. I thought they were
I thought they had one more year. I could be wrong.
You may be right. I could be wrong.
Yeah, but I thought they had one more year left at FCS. They have given notice that they're going to leave, but I don't think they've left yet. But I could be wrong on that. Let me go check and see.
I could be just as wrong as you are on that. I know then Jacksonville State was another, I think that's elevating, if I remember correctly.
But they haven't yet, right? But they still haven't yet. So let me just look at James Madison and see if they are now in the Sun Belt. So I just looked at it. Yeah, they are now in the Sun Belt. So they are in. And yes, we do know that they have approved the 12-team playoff, but we just haven't been able to talk about it yet because we have to dive into what it looks like. We will do a show on that next week for sure. We will do a show on that next week once we kind of look at it and what does it mean for Notre Dame and all that other kind of stuff. And then lastly, Uncle Rico with a super chat. Thank you, Rico, very, very, very much. Last year, Ohio State was the third youngest team in the country with 51% returning production. Their youngest team in 20 years. This year, they have 73% returning production. Coaching aside, youth was a major factor. Here's the thing, Uncle Rico. If you look at that production last year, Ohio State and Notre Dame were two of the youngest teams in the country. And I'm actually going to look at that real quick because that was something that everybody talked about with Ohio State. Let me see here. Returning production 2021. So Notre Dame was also really, really low in that as well. So if you look at last year, Ohio State ranked 124th with 50% of their production returning. Notre Dame ranked 123rd, right above them with 53%. So if you're going to use that argument, then you also have to use that argument for Notre Dame as well.
Right.
And so to me, that's why I just don't think that you can look at it and say that, this is going to be any different. And if you look at this season, so this year, Ohio State, where is Ohio State this year's team? So let me find Ohio State on this list here now, because again, they have a lot coming back. Ohio State ranks 25th this year at 23. I'm trying to find Notre Dame on this list, and I cannot find Notre Dame on this list. Give me a second. I hate when there's Stanford's fifth at 83rd%. Sometimes people coming back. So now Notre Dame is 54th at 66% coming back. So both of these teams clearly have a lot more production coming back than last year. I kind of find the 73% a little bit interesting when you consider how much they lost on the offensive side of the ball with the two receivers. But they're both teams that have a lot more production coming back this year than they had last year. I think you also have to look into the fact that some of Notre Dame's guys that were expected to be starters last year ended up getting hurt. If Maris Luafau plays last year like he should have, Notre Dame's production returning takes a big jump forward. So there's that kind of aspect as well. If Chris Tyree doesn't spend the whole year banged up, again, same story. So if Blake Fisher doesn't get hurt in the opener, same story, right? So I just don't think that can be factored in as much as you think it does, because
you have to use
they apply to both.
Apply to both, exactly. I mean, there's two sides to a coin, right? Like it's not a one-sided affair. It's not like Notre Dame has all production, no production returning or something.
The only difference is quarterback. I mean, that's the only difference. I mean, there's no difference in returning production anywhere but quarterback, in my opinion. No discernible difference. There's some places Notre Dame has more, some places Ohio State has a little bit more, but it's the same. The big difference is quarterback.
Sure.
And that's the difference.
It matters. It matters, obviously. But again, you just can't assume that Notre Dame's going to be the same team like we can't assume that Ohio State's going to be the same team.
And that's what makes
that's good or bad.
Right. So that's going to do it for our prediction show. We will be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. Vince and I will have our college football IB countdown to kickoff show. We will preview the Notre Dame Ohio State matchup a little bit in more detail in the first half of the show. Then we will preview the big games the upcoming weekend. We'll get more Vince's take on those things, obviously. Look, we've had a ton of Ohio State fans join our channel. Some of them they had to go. Some of them have been awesome, and we appreciate you guys very, very much for being in our chat and being respectful. Hopefully you guys stick around as long as you continue to be respectful after the game, win or lose. I would encourage you maybe not jump in the chat right afterwards if you want to keep it a civil relationship in either direction. But we would love to have you guys on the show again moving forward as we continue to do this, because we're going to always bring you our honest analysis, of course, about things. And as we mentioned earlier, if you could keep Sean Stiers in your prayers, obviously we think Sean's going to be all right. But anytime you're talking about dealing with heart stuff and things like that, it can get a little bit scary. So this is going to be I think a fun game, Ryan. And then now we're going to have to sit and talk about what the matchup's going to be like next year. But I have a feeling, I could be wrong, I have a feeling that the next time after tomorrow, that the next time Ohio State and Notre Dame play will not be next year in Notre Dame Stadium. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. So anyway, appreciate y'all so much. Game day is almost here, everybody. It's been a long summer. We're excited. Ryan's first official season with Irish Breakdown. Very excited about that. The growth we've had in the last year has been so amazing. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank Marcus Freeman for that. I want to thank Brian Kelly for that. We've had a lot of different reasons, but we really appreciate y'all very, 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 very much. And look forward to more. So again, 10 a.m. tomorrow, post-game show after the game. We ended up getting a hotel right by the stadium, so we'll be able to get over there pretty quickly. We'll have our post-game show. Then Vince and I will get up Sunday morning, drive home, break down the film, and then 7 o'clock on Sunday night, we will have our upon further review, and then Monday we'll be back to our normal routine. So Ryan and Sean Davis will have their Monday recruiting show, and we'll be back to IB Nation Sports Talk on Monday night. If things continue to go how we think, it'll be Vince on the show on Monday night, and we'll hopefully get Sean back here soon as possible. So appreciate y'all keeping him in your prayers, and we'll continue to do so. If you're going to the game on Saturday, as I said before, travel safe, be smart, don't allow yourself to get drawn into something that you're going to have a hard time coming back from. So I know that happens more and more nowadays. And as someone who lived in Ohio, just be smart, be careful, make this an enjoyable weekend, win or lose, because there's always tomorrow. And I do believe, win or lose, Marcus Freeman is going to turn this program around. Will it be tomorrow? We'll find out. Will it maybe take a few more weeks, a year or so? We'll find out. But that's just enjoy that ride. And that's what I'm going to continue to do. So everybody have a great rest of your day. Have a great Friday. We'll be talking to you again tomorrow, 10 a.m. on the IB Countdown to Kickoff here on the Irish Breakdown podcast.